Okay, we should be live now. So welcome to the first September Defensio of the Synthetic Landscape Lab. I'm Claudia Pasquero, professor in Innsbruck University and head of the lab. We have as guest today Professor Aliza Andrasek from the MIT. Aliza is also one of the pioneers in computational design and the role of artificial intelligence and robotic in design thinking. We have with us as well Stéphanie Audry-Chaltiel. She's director of MUD Architect, as well as a practice that develop work and research at the boundary between biology, robotics, and design. So one-to-one scale prototyping and the influence that this has got on our contemporary design. Dr. Ilaria Di Carlo, she's a director of the EA Visiting School, as well as the Ilaria Di Carlo Architects, and History and Theory faculty at the Bartlett UCL, a research focus on the role between aesthetic and ecological thinking. Emmanuel Zaroukas, which I hope is with us. I think he has some connection problem maybe. And Emmanuel is leading the History and Theory in Urban Design at the Bartlett BPro. And his research focus on the role of neural network and cognition in computational design. Marco Poletto, which is our external examiner this year, is founder of Ecologic Studio, as well as holding a doctor from the practice-based PhD over at MIT. And his work focuses on the design, innovation, and the integration of biotechnology and artificial intelligence in design. Maria Kapskova, who is a research assistant at the Synthetic Landscape Lab and a research focus on how artificial intelligence and biological intelligence can influence design. So today we will see 5 students with multiple type of approach that all fit the one of the Synthetic Landscape Lab, but with an independent take on the brief and method that they've been developing through the thesis. Maria, would you like to introduce the student?
Yes, thank you, Claudia. So today we have Carbini and Enzinger, who will present first. We will have Charles Virion. I just go as an order of the presentation. Stefan Siegel, David Huber, and Eric Poltner. So guys, we'll go with this order, and should we invite Carbinian with the first presentation?
Thank you. Okay. Carbinian, we can start.
Thank you. Maria, can you allow me again to share the screen, please?
Claudia, it's your turn.
Claudia.
You can share it now. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Just like Maria introduced myself already, I'm Carbinian Enzinger, and I'm happy to present you my master thesis, Hydromorphology, today. And for that, I want to start with a short video.
Every year, 8.6 million cubic meters of water flow through the mountain range of Nepal. This huge hydrologic network consists of over 6,000 rivers, making up 2.7% of Earth's fresh water. It supplies over 1 billion people downstream in India and Pakistan. Beside being vital to human and non-human existence, water is the determining force of morphologic processes. Landslides, floods, water-related diseases, as well as soil degradation caused by erosion lead to huge damage to the economy and to human life. With a constantly growing population, especially in cities, the human impact on the water quality became increasingly significant. In order to rethink the strategies of how urban sprawl should take place, we have to analyze the topography from different perspectives and understand opportunities as well as risks of hydromorphologic processes. Just like this water plant, an urban network has to adapt to a variety of external parameters, especially the hydrology. A new planning workflow is needed that incorporates the knowledge about the environment in order to generate a new urban network that combines both human and non-human interests. Particles, which represent human and non-human agents, are influenced by different forces and reorganized to optimize distribution. By overlapping both networks, dense spots become visible. These are the areas with high surface water deposit. To loosen these tensions, water has to be redistributed in a more efficient way.
The project Hydromorphology aims to respond to the trend of humans to shape landscapes through anthropocentric environmentalism, meaning that the primary goal of conserving the environment lies in the exploitation by and from human purposes. The philosophic idea of deep ecology is that our ecosystem is formed by interrelationships between many organisms that depend on each other. Especially in city planning, it is an important role for us to treat our environment like our garden, which provides us with food and water. Therefore, we have the responsibility to protect it from our own destruction in order to sustain a healthy equilibrium. In the first part of this work, I offer new ways of mapping landscapes to create a more diverse understanding of ecological community that goes towards a more inclusive approach on environmentalism. Furthermore, I explore various techniques that resemble the emergence of different human as well as non-human networks to find an alternative approach how the idea of deep ecology can be implemented in a new form of urbanism that incorporates the interests of multiple organisms as a model of true democracy. First off, I want to bring to mind that water is the source of life for all organisms on Earth. Therefore, it is important to first understand the risks and possibilities in order to develop this new form of democratic urbanism. As you can see in this diagram, water-related disasters like floods and droughts cause huge economic damage, while water-related diseases like diarrhea and cholera are accountable for the majority of people dying every year. This is due to lack of improved sanitation and inadequate water treatment. Water is also the main driving force when looking at the morphology of a landscape. Rainfall removes soil and rock and transports it downstream to another location. This process of erosion is happening at all scales, like you can see in these two images. The scale of the erosion varies by the amount of precipitation and the factor of time. These erosions can also be computed, which allows us to make predictions about how the landscape will further erode. Nepal has 2.7% of the available fresh water on Earth. 3,000 glaciers, lakes, and lakes in the highest mountains feed over 6,000 rivers and streams that flow through the Nepali valleys. This enormous flow supplies water to over 1 billion inhabitants downstream in India and Pakistan. However, nearly 5 million inhabitants of Nepal, which is about 18% of the population, do not have access to a safe source of drinking water, and 27% do not have access to improved sanitation. As a result, the existing surface waters are exposed to heavy pollution through industry, agriculture, as well as the discharge of untreated sewage from dense urban areas, making it unsuitable as a safe source of drinking water and therefore threatens the whole biosphere downstream. Groundwater is becoming the major source of drinking water, putting an immense stress on the groundwater levels and the ecology depending on it. Looking at the population growth and rate of urban sprawl in the metropolitan region of Kathmandu, as you can see in this diagram, it becomes obvious that this trend is likely to worsen if no countervailing measures are undertaken. This map of the Kathmandu Valley was processed with different erosion techniques illustrated in the prior chapter. This enhances the awareness how the process of water dynamics and the accompanying morphology of the landscape behaves over time. Additionally, the shading of the map conveys information about the slope of the topography reduced to a black and white image. The lightest areas represent the steepest slopes and therefore the highest rates of surface water runoff, as well as the highest risk of landslides. On the other hand, the black areas depict the rather flat areas with slower surface water runoff, allowing better groundwater recharge. This map lets us conceive valuable information about hydromorphological processes independent from human intervention. Over the course of the past century, the human impact on the environment became increasingly significant, making it impossible to analyze hydrological processes without involving human networks. This map adds the Anthropocene as an extra layer of information involving houses and street networks. Unfortunately, the areas with the highest potential for groundwater recharge are also the areas best suited for urban development, leading to a negative effect on the hydrology. The sealing of the soil surface not only leads to an increased surface water runoff and lowering of the groundwater level, but also to a higher risk of flooding. Since water is the main impulse of morphologic processes and the source of all living beings, it is vital to set it in the focus of attention when trying to develop a new strategy of a sustainable urban sprawl. It is important to understand where the water comes from and what the major influences on the water quality are. This drawing illustrates how the water quality decreases subject to the density of the built-up urban environment. Clarifying these morphological processes and using them as a base map is further used as a foundation for the development of a new network that allows human and non-human networks to interact with each other in a form of a true democracy that incorporates nature as an indispensable part of the world we live in. Through a visual representation how the dynamics of water and the resulting erosion on the landscape behaves, it is easier to understand what areas are vulnerable to pollution, floods, slides, and other water-related disasters. Conceiving the geomorphology of the Kathmandu Valley in this way makes it possible to rethink the strategy of urban sprawl and the accompanying effects on the biosphere. The formation of an urban landscape like the Kathmandu Valley consists of two contrary processes. The first one, described in prior, is the morphology of the landscape through various types of erosion processes, mainly driven by water. The second one is the emergence of human and non-human networks that grow based on the systemic interconnection between various social, economic, and ecologic parameters. These networks have a certain amount of influence on the systemic interconnection of the overall system. In order to have this kind of true democracy emerge in an urban environment, various networks have to be analyzed and the influences on each other quantified. Using algorithms in this design process allows me to use simple principles that can create complex results that correspond to growth patterns found in nature. An algorithm that describes growth of an urban environment must be generated using feedback loops. Repeating branching systems similar to the growth of a tree or a coral can be generated using simple building elements, which are iterated multiple times to create a deterministic growing process that does not react to any external parameters. The process of reaction diffusion is the next step from a deterministic system to a system that is self-organizing and can change and evolve by adjusting parameters and conditions. It can represent the interconnection between two contrary networks. In terms of an urban environment, this could be the interconnection between human and non-human. This is a process that is incorporating two systems to the equation. When analyzing entire landscapes like the Kathmandu Valley, it becomes obvious that the entity of the biosphere is a lot more complex, and many more external forces play a role in the final outcome of the system. An urban network has properties of emergence, meaning that the entity of the system shows characteristics that an individual part of it does not. Important for an emerging system is that the interacting parts must retain their independence while at the same time affect each other. Urban sprawl operates in the same manner. Each person behaves in the individual way, but the entity of how urban networks are growing on a larger scale relies on the interconnection between all of them. To create a system that takes these interconnections into account, I further used particles. This allows me to emit a large number of elements in a kind of digital lab that behave individually, can be controlled by a variety of external forces, and also interact with each other. Applied on the topography, each particle network is affected by different forces and the topography itself. In this way, they reorganize, and by connecting them, they create optimized self-organizing networks. When overlapping human and non-human networks, there are different areas where many particles accumulate to dense spots. These are the areas. In these areas, it becomes clear that both networks strive to areas with high surface water deposit, since both depend on it. To ease these tensions between human and non-human networks and their impact on the surface water quality, we have to develop a new way of how water is being distributed. I was inspired by the water elevating towers, a low-tech approach that has been used in the late 19th century in Morocco. It is an alternative to an aqueduct that uses the hydrostatic pressure to transport water from one side of a valley to another. I adapted this linear approach of transporting water to apply to the 3D topography of the Kathmandu Valley. For this, I wrote a script that calculates local high and low points on the topography through a flow line analysis. The low points are the locations where the water is being absorbed from, and the high points are the spots from where the water will be distributed to cover the entire valley. Through the hydrostatic pressure, the water absorbed at the low points can be transported to the next high points at a lower elevation, from where it can be redistributed again. In this way, an interconnecting network is generated that links the entire valley to create a distribution system that doesn't need any external input of energy. But how can we translate all this data and information about erosion, slope, particle distribution, and water flow, and so on, that I created in the prior chapters to develop a new urban landscape? For this, I used CycleGun, a machine learning algorithm where models are trained using a collection of images from a source in a target domain. Once trained, the algorithm can compute any input image and translates it into an output image. In this case, I used my erosion drawings and trained the algorithm to translate it into a satellite image. I repeated this process individually for different kinds of networks. In this case, we see the non-human network, and here we see an urban network, the human network. After training has been completed, there's also the possibility to manipulate the input drawings to get another layer of information into the drawing. The beauty about it is that it's not just drawing over the output image, but it rearranges all the building elements in the drawing to get a plausible result. A new distributed urban environment is generated, which entirely adapts to the hydrology of the landscape, allowing water to be freely distributed to any desired location of the landscape. Additionally, the knowledge about the morphology, which was calculated through erosion simulations, defined the distribution of natural and urban networks. This explosion diagram illustrates what inputs have been used to generate this new landscape. The distribution of the urban environment follows the course of the flow lines and is based on the erosion simulations, letting the entire city act as a drainage system and therefore making it safer against water-related disasters. Particle simulations further influence the distribution of human as well as non-human networks in order to establish an urban environment that also incorporates the non-human as an indispensable part of the world we live in. Additionally, two main typologies are introduced to serve as the water distribution system. Water towers form the main infrastructure to move water to the local high points where the water will be distributed from. The structure from where the water is distributed from is generated to allow an optimized interconnection between human and non-human networks. It is capable of storing water to compensate dry periods and allow groundwater recharge to optimize the overall hydrology of the environment. Additionally, it serves as a framework providing habitable space for non-human networks, safe from human interventions. Most importantly, the structure connects the surrounding urban environment, offering a controlled water distribution as a safe source of water for the inhabitants of Kathmandu. As you can see, all the steep parts of the topography, which are the most vulnerable to landslides, are overgrown by trees to prevent them from further eroding and cause economic damage to the inhabitants. At the same time, the river course is optimized to the flow behavior, offering retention areas where water can accumulate, allowing groundwater recharge to improve the overall hydrology of the valley. By redistributing the land use and infrastructure according to the geomorphology, the metropolitan area of Kathmandu can fulfill the human and non-human needs while becoming more sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks, Corbinian. We can open up to the comment.
Shall I go first?
Yes.
Yes, Marco, please.
I go for it. Well, no, I think at this point, the only thing I can do is to congratulate Corbinian. I mean, I have seen the work before, and I can see the constant progress you have made during this period, despite all the difficulties, of course, of this month and little contact. And so you pretty much worked on your own, but nevertheless, the feedback we gave you in green lights and other occasions, I can see have been absorbed, and as always, I think during the project you have somehow made a personal contribution to it. So rather than just applying the advice literally. So I think there is a clear indication for me that you have the ability not just to embrace the brief and to basically respond to it, but also to effectively craft your own trajectory through it, and therefore produce what I would recognize as an innovative project or innovation. I think it's, from my experience, it's rare to see students that combine incredible proficiency with the latest digital tools, a clear sense of aesthetic in their application, but also a true engagement and interest for what the project can bring to debate, conceptually, of course, but also very much in terms of actually making an impact. I think you are truly demonstrating, in my mind, the interest in how we as designers can make an impact and improve cities radically at a very large scale, but through an approach that, despite being driven by digital techniques, also can be implemented through means and technologies that I can see appropriate to the context. So I think there is a certain ability that you have shown and demonstrated, which, of course, could be refined further, but I think you have demonstrated this sensibility in kind of negotiating the excitement for these new tools and protocols with a sensibility for the material processes that you have, let's say, analyzed and extracted on site. And I think, in my mind, my understanding, I think this is exactly what the Synthetic Landscape Lab is about. It's in a way kind of combining a sensibility for the processes of the landscape, the territory, which are not just natural but that are effectively this unique intersection of natural and artificial man-made processes that we find in urban landscapes, like the example of Kathmandu. How that can be effectively understood perhaps more profoundly through the means of digital technologies. And so this kind of a relationship between these two worlds, I think, is very clear in the work. I also received the book. Thank you for sending it. And it's beautiful as well. It's very well laid out, and the images, when seen in high resolution printed format, are actually stunning. In that sense, is a shame somehow to see the whole thing through Zoom, but it's here, and and I could see it. So yeah, at this point, I think I just want to congratulate for what I think is an exceptional result.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I would join Marco in congratulating you for exceptional project. I think it's really commendable, very impressive. I think the most impressive parts for me, actually the visual, the mapping tools that you're using, and the way you are reading the landscape. The images are stunning, and not only that they're incredibly beautiful, they could be printed very large in a, I don't know, a gallery or something like this, but also I think they could be used to raise awareness, to combine with with your arguments, which was especially successful, I thought, the conceptual part of the project, looking at these different networks, human, non-human, geography, hydrology of the site, and how they actually interact with each other, and how you then strategically tweak them, rewire them in order to reprogram this ecology. So that for me is like extremely successful components of this project. In this later stage, when you start using machine learning, I'm a little bit confused. First, I have a question for you, just to clarify the final topography is synthetic, or you are still working with original topography, but applying? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm working with the initial topography, and then I use the erosion simulations to use them as a base, how the urban and natural networks are going to be distributed on it. So the topography is the same; it's just the distribution of the urban and the natural networks that are changed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because in some images it seemed like it was synthesized through the image information synthesized through machine learning, and I wasn't sure that would be then the project that implies a very large terraforming sort of or extent to, not really terraforming is not the word, but you would have to really massively reform landscape, and I wasn't sure that would be a viable proposal, but anyways, I think the way the build mass interacts with the landscape, the green, and etc., is very successful again. Now the final, and of course this is a very extensive project, so you have to pick your battles, and I think you did. So when we see the final renders of this kind of almost favela-like whatever architectures accumulating there, I assume this is just a sort of a placeholder for whatever build mass would develop there.
Yes.
But you did design these water elements that are in the water, these objects, and the one on the hill, and the one on the hill, actually, I didn't mind. I actually was wondering if that can happen more extensively through the landscape. It seemed quite the one that was based on reaction diffusion on the hill. Mm-hmm. But the ones in the water, these kind of shiny objects, I'm not quite sure in terms of design value how successful that is. But again, it almost feels too much to try to achieve in one project. So it's some sort of suggestion, but one could think that element itself could be more integrated in a context, in a landscape, rather than being these objects. But anyways, I think it's an extremely successful project, and visually incredible, and also videos are nicely done. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I will pick on where Alisa finished it. I'm extremely impressed, and I love the way in which you have described the rationality of the hydrologic identity, through the ecology of the water, which is somehow described by the different material organizations that it encounters during the flowing. So the topography, the geography, the presence or absence of vegetative systems. So in a way, it's like describing the water mapping other intelligences, whose performance and material expressivity are connecting and are acting as a sort of a system that composed the identity of the hydrologic basin. And this is for me very contemporary, because it talks about other intelligences that work together to perform an ecological act. Now, what the question that I have, coming from a background of an urban planner, is how would you see in your project the phasing plan of this overall system? Because in a way you're talking about human and non-human actors, or actant, as Latour would call them. So the human ones are usually proceeding through phasing plans, no? When you have to map an urbanization, while non-human, like the vegetative layer, is more working through succession thresholds. So I'm wondering how, maybe you didn't think about it, or maybe you did, how would the human and non-human actants work together to construct, no, the plan during time? How would you envision the phasing plan of this project?
The basic idea was that I'm providing the framework or this kind of algorithm that is creating this landscape, but the input data that goes into this algorithm, that it incorporates knowledge from a lot of different areas, since I don't believe that I can be the one who decides for everybody or for the natural and for the human network. So that it's more like a code where the knowledge from a lot of different areas can influence the code and how the outcome will be. That it incorporates, for example, knowledge from biology about the landscape and about the natural networks, and also the knowledge about the human networks, and that this will influence the final outcome, and that this algorithm can keep growing the more input data we give it. That was the basic idea.
Okay, because I think it's, in a way, it's very important to think about the time, no? And how this plan is gonna grow in time, and which actant is gonna start first, and then who's gonna follow, and how they are gonna all, let's say, dance together to arrive to the overall plan, no? So I was very interested to know if you thought about this element of time and how the landscape is gonna evolve and who is going to direct it. Maybe there is not a top-down direction, actually it's a bottom-up one, but still, I was curious to know how you saw it or how you imagine it.
Yeah, it's more like, imagine that I'm providing the framework of water distribution, and how the urban environment grows out of it is more like a bottom-up approach that allows the inhabitants and to nature to inhabit this landscape.
Yeah, this is something we discussed various times with Corbinian, because also for this representation that we see here, which I think is very compelling, but on the other hand, we discussed various times and it didn't agree with me. I would have left the little boxes, the more abstract, to allow for, you know, further intervention at the smaller scale, maybe that could describe how the urban structure would evolve. But Corbinian insisted that he wanted to provide this water infrastructure and allow the current construction technique that they have in Kathmandu to reform the urban structure. So that's, I think, where the project was standing at the moment, and was really focused on a specific aspect of how this territory would evolve.
I think it's a good idea that he did that, because to a certain extent, in my mind, what I found really successful about this project is that although we are looking at an image that is, you know, it's a fairly realistic in a way, because of the way he laid out the whole project, we know very well that this is not, let's say, the final proposal, right? What he wants to build as such. You know, we know very well that this is an instance of a kind of infinite amount of possibilities of scenarios that are in constant evolution, but somehow by providing a visual language to bring all these levels together, I think he actually makes a significant contribution, because it's precisely through this visual language that different actors and systems, or actant as you call them, can talk to each other in a way, I feel. And I think that's where the role designers becomes crucial. It's not just about the algorithms that you have kind of assembled in a new workflow, if you want, but it's precisely that you have also very beautifully created a visual language for this workflow to communicate to a whole ranges of actors. And in that sense, it becomes potentially, it can come alive in a sense that it will be able to, you know, connect knowledge and from different fields. And in that sense, I think I found it very, very successful. Again, the application of AI, which I think you also have done in a quite mature way, considering that is all very recent in terms of its use. The cycle gun here, I think it's used in a very clever way in connection to the mapping and the sort of you know, simulation of erosion. So all the elements of analysis somehow through the cycle gun is translated visually into not a new landscape, but a whole range of possible landscapes. So let's say the intelligence of the cycle gun itself becomes it's harvested again as a tool for communication in my mind. And so, you know, that's where let's say the whole idea of phasing, etc., become obsolete. I think you have created a new time frame, which is very much non-linear in that sense. It has this kind of a multiple feedback loop embedded into it, and in that sense, you can, you know, we can begin to dream about you know, how the time of erosion and of these kind of processes connects with the super accelerated time frame for, you know, that the gun uses to kind of spit out whole sets of imaginary landscapes with the time of construction of the individual units that in your mind may be also carried on locally by you know, community groups or local architects and so on. So there is for me clearly a kind of platform that could be enacted, and that very much uses the visual language you have created as a platform of communication.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was kind of encouraging as well, that this is a platform for communication and build up of awareness and enacting certain things. And also the time is very much parallel and simultaneous and non-linear in this project, of course. But I still claim that this project really looks the best from the top view in all these maps and from the top. When we get into this kind of perspectival three-dimensional scenario, then maybe the power is less. And I wonder, is that, just for the sake of discussion, is that maybe also the consequence of the current tools that we have with machine learning that is working with image-based data rather than multi-dimensional? And of course, you are feeding various types of relationships and data into this system, but still, the majority of it is processing through images. So therefore, and still, it's a very powerful tool for communication, as Marco is pointing out, and maybe action. But I think we collectively have a way to go to get into n dimensions of this in the future.
There is a workflow that we are trying to set up for investigating the three-dimensional aspect of the maps that we obtain from the machine learning process, something we are investigating in Innsbruck as well and in UCL. I think partly as an influence, surely this as an influence. There is also an aspect of what Ilaria was pointing out about we consider this unit that emerged, that it was the interest of Corvinia to retain connected to the local construction technique. Maybe it would be also interesting to understand how these can be reframed with different type of material systems. But yeah, I think these are the two components that influence the tridimensionality, but surely what Elisa pointed out is something that we are researching on and trying to understand what is the workflow that is smoother in this transition, because there is not a clear and smooth workflow from what we obtain.
Let me post it because I'm struggling with the same, and it's extremely computationally expensive. And my suspicion is that we will have to wait for almost like the next paradigm in computing to really get there. But certain ways of communicating we can achieve already now.
Can I jump in?
Oh, okay.
So sorry, no, you can go.
Do you want to go or shall I go? Yeah, hi Corbinian. Yeah, that's really refreshing work. I guess we really see the strength of the team all together. How you managed to bring those new strategies and those new landscapes, which I found is really bringing a step further to what we see in landscape work. So I just have a few questions regarding where do you want to bring this research afterwards? I mean, do you want to keep on researching on those fields? Do you have a particular interest into bringing it into real projects? Because I think it would be quite interesting to see and to explore if you push the system to its limits, to explore the risks that it comes with it and what you're going to alter as well, because you're kind of doing an in-depth, a profound transformation of a terrain and of an ecosystem. So it would be interesting to see who, so you're talking a lot about human and non-human. So which kind of the flow of birds, the flow of animals, different animals would be impacted by that flow of water. Would it be beneficial for the fauna or not? So of course, this is not part of, I guess, your brief, and here you responded brilliantly to that first step, let's say. But I'm really curious about to know where you would like to bring that research in the next steps, and if you see some possibility of bringing it into some real life projects.
Well, yes, I really wish that I can keep working on this in some way. I don't know how yet, but I also feel that this project is like right at the beginning right now, that there's like a lot of, like you said, a lot of points where I can go much more in depth and research a lot more. I'm not sure where or how I'm going to do this, but I'm really planning on keep on researching in this direction.
Fantastic. Yeah, because it is really different kind of risks that you're taking, whether if you're bringing it more towards a research academic environment to push the many different branches that you're kind of opening up with this kind of in-depth alteration of the terrain for the best of the water, or whether if you're bringing it into a real life project, you're taking really different kind of risks in a way, and you will probably need to tackle a very different or to choose a scale, a bit like one of your images where you show that 10 meters, 10 centimeters, it happens the same kind of branching system of the water. Maybe in a real scale project, it would be a very important choice from yourself and your team to determine which kind of scale would be the most relevant and the most helpful in a way, in a context for the water spreading and treatment. So just a few very quick considerations or ideas. If during the path of the water, you would think about the purifying as well, or just to detect what would purify the different branches, if you have certain kind of vegetation on the way or other kind of organisms that would purify the water. Then I was curious to know how you decided on the tower as opposed to wells, for example. Is it easier to excavate to collect the water, or is it easier to get those Moroccan traditional towers? And of course, it would be a very different impact on the landscape. Then I was curious to know about the kind of maximum density that you could propose of those towers, for example, and the maximum density on the very beautiful images that you showed of the network of organisms. It would be interesting as you are doing machine learning and to kind of loop the system and kind of make hypotheses about what is the maximum density of both the network organisms and both the towers, for example. At the moment, perhaps the system might reverse and might become negative as opposed to like helping in the landscape. I don't know, but it's just some considerations. And then I'm really fascinated as well by the images and the IE you put the AI you put it in place. I think it would be interesting to see other disciplines how they use that image recognition and how they image treatment, like millions of images are then kind of analyzed to make scenarios. How many, as well, again, is about, I think, determining the maximum amount of images you might want to treat in order to not like explode the system, but still be able to be legible, so to serve your purpose as well. And in the image learning as well, in the machine learning and the image recognition, do you determine different kind of categories? Like, for example, you know, in the cracks that are really used a lot, for example, for concrete detection, that with the image learning, like there are like 3 different of cracks that can be recognized, the ones that are just initial, the ones that are still treatable, and the ones that are already a disaster. So I wonder if it would be interesting to translate this kind of logics about classifying the image into 3 kinds or different kinds of image typology, in a way, for those branching systems of the path of the water.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
I'll think about all of these considerations.
Yeah. They're not direct questions, they're just to open up.
Yeah.
Okay, can I jump in? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well done for the project. I mean, a lot of people have given you very good feedback and have been very enthusiastic about it. I will start with from the end and from your final image, and I will link my comment to, if I recall correctly, what Alisa said about this kind of favela-like landscape. And I was wondering, you know, if we can recognize something so strongly, then we can create this this kind of ripples of thoughts about not only the social and political struggles of the favelas, but also, you know, the broader ecological and territorial problems. And I think this is the point where your project kind of fell short, precisely because it gives us something that we can recognize from the world that we live in. And this is one of the problems in your line of narrative. You're very human. You're very human-centered. You're even able to make a distinction between what is human and what is non-human. And this is precisely requires someone that can make that decision, and that decision is you, right? And you can recognize what is a human value, and you can recognize what is a human biology, and then ecology, or the human needs, if you want, and then you describe something as a non-human, something that is outside from all these values. And the funny thing is that you're starting with this kind of certainty of what is human and non-human, and then you leave the whole urban synthetic landscape into the ambivalence of a framework. And I can understand why Marco says it's quite nice that we see this kind of realistic image, but if I was in your case, I would start in completely different order. We would start with an ambivalence, what is a human, and I would try to paint out through a machine learning and AI what a precisely unknown human urban system that kind of involves and being incorporated all these intelligences and time zones and timelines and timescapes and spaces will create. And although you have all the tools and although you have all the computational power, and it's not a matter of technique, right? It's a matter of how you can speculate with this technique. Because let's not fool ourselves, it's not going to come in an AI that can solve this kind of issues. If we'll not be creative and able to kind of speculate about a future scenario, then technology will not give us to us. So I would suggest try to lose a little bit yourself. I mean, lose a little bit of what defines you as a human and how you can make a distinction with a non-human, and try to be more descriptive and speculative at the end, instead of presenting to us.
Oh, Manas, we lost you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I had to stop. Sorry, had a break. If you can actually give an image to us that we can refract ourselves and not reflect what we already know. And the worst thing, the bad thing of this image is that it kind of represents to us the worst possible urban scenario, which is a favela. And I think that's a pity. You know, because favela, again, it says it comes with whole connotations about political, economical, democratic struggles. And I can hear you saying that you want to make this kind of true democracy, okay? But instead of starting with something that you already know, something with starting that you don't know, and try to build that democracy again. I think this is what I was kind of missing into your narrative and to the direction of your project. But I would agree with everyone in the panel that, you know, the visuals were fantastic. For me, this kind of the new AI techniques and the machine learning and the gun that you are using are super powerful, precisely because they can throw us out of any window. Okay, and it doesn't matter if it's a 3D, 2D dimensional, if it operates on images or non-images, it kind of rewires our brain. Okay, and this is where we construct knowledge. You don't put into the mix knowledge, you put into the mix intelligences, and then you create your own knowledge as an urban designer and as an architect. And that would be the best practice of all these kind of techniques. But well done, you have already started scratching a very nice territory. So keep working.
Thanks
Okay?
for the comment.
Thank you.
Manos, I do agree with part of your comment, and it's also what I was mentioning, and it's in line with Ilaria's comment. I think myself and Corbinia had a discussion of 1.5 hours yesterday on this subject. And yes, and this is also part of the process and of the fact that you work at a very large scale, and maybe the top view remain the highest achievement at the moment. This part of the unit need to be developed further, both in terms of its content, brief, tool, material system, and what it actually could become. Still maybe retaining a level of the self-organization. Doesn't mean we design it from the top down, but one thing is self-organization, the other thing is to let things see the situation as it is. That I agree with Manas.
But maybe, I don't know, maybe as Ilaria was mentioning that maybe the time is the point. Maybe at this point we have favelas, maybe at this point we have this vision that Carbinian proposed, but then with time it evolves, and this GAN algorithm could be like a way to extract the intelligence of the landscape, the intelligence of the water, and then maybe we could plug this idea of the top-down behaviors of the citizens, of the construction of the citizens with the new materials, with the new material systems. And then if we are capable to combine these two actors, like two intelligences within one algorithm, then it would evolve differently. And then it would replace the favelas to the different types of both social systems and material systems.
Yeah, no, definitely, that is a good point. Thanks Maria, thanks Corbinian and all the guests. So now we have, so as I was saying, each student focused on a specific topic. So this was more focused on landscape and water infrastructure. The next two projects are titled Knowledge Ecologists from Stefan and Synthetic IFE from Charles. The first one developed a design more starting from a theoretical reframing of how knowledge gets stored, while the second one focused on material experimentation with mycelium and to understand how this could be used to remetabolize microplastic and have an impact on the larger urban scale of design in a site in the panel. So let's start from Stefan, that, as I said, has got a project which is driven by where design is more driven by a theoretical approach. So Stefan, please.
Okay. Hello. Sorry. My name is Stefan Siegel, and as a student at the Synthetic Landscape Lab in Innsbruck, I'm working on a master thesis with the aim of exploring how digitization could affect the approach towards knowledge-based designing and providing proposals hereupon. To start with, I have a video. Have we humans not always been driven by a thirst for knowledge? Milestones in the history of knowledge evolution show this, and their interrelationships indicate that knowledge accumulation is a complex process. This diagram shows some interconnections regarding certain attributes and subjects in the development of knowledge. From the oral transmission of information to the printing of books, a lot of time passed. And from there, the growth of information increased rapidly until today. The big data age is leading to a similar information expansion, but with once again entirely different dimensions. Digitization affects all areas of life. The quantity and quality of accessible digital data is growing exponentially. Conventional data storing consumes huge amounts of energy and space, and it seems likely that capacities will run out. At the same time, groundbreaking technologies such as data storage in DNA strands are appearing on the horizon. In the foreseeable future, this may not even require laboratory space, since data can also be stored in living organisms. What could be more obvious than to conceive of knowledge ecology as a landscape in the open air? This proposal shows in the first step an essayistic speculation of a distributed information storing and processing machine that is inherent in an enigmatic terrain, partially created by its own intelligence. All in all, a machinic, intelligent landscape emerges, but concealed in the initial source code of the system, there is a gate implemented that represents the unconscious of this machine. Well, it's time for the application of these tested algorithms on a specific site. The central Tyrol region is characterized through dynamic elevation, woodland area, and the results of hydroerosion. As starting points, library and educational site coordinates serve as nuclei for a growing algorithm. A shortest path algorithm starting from these points defines districts. A new topology is generated by manipulating the elevation of areas generated by shortest path and branches. Hills and valleys emerge. Those are transformed by massing tools. The closer to the initial center, the higher. In the next step of detailing and zooming in, the source geometry is subdivided in several passes, which leads to a granular fragmentation, to a surface growth-like network. Digitization is changing many aspects of life. powerful computing techniques such as distributed computing leads to the improvement of artificial intelligence. Today, the learning curve for machines appears to be sharply steeper than it is for human beings, which is fundamentally changing the relationship between humans and machines. This proposal is about distributed information storing and processing machine in a landscape scaled dimension. Humans were always creative and inventive. This diagram shows complex interconnections regarding specific attributes and subjects in the changes and development of knowledge culture. One of the changes in knowledge evolution could be the following. Data can be stored in organisms. Until now, we have used interiors for storing and calculating. But what could be more obvious than to conceive of knowledge ecology as a landscape in the open air? This leads to an essayistic speculation of a generic knowledge ecology based on elements of these changes. Here, the terrain is seen as an ecology containing distributed computing and storing devices. These landscapes are being evaluated with tools like further scaling, disintegration of the surface through granularity, or reframing by interpretation. A catalog of generated landscapes which are transformed by massing tools, displacement operation, and erosion simulations is formed. Further erosion simulations reveals details about the conditions below the surface. Iterative steps of massing and transforming of parts feed new speculations about surface and conditions. Foam-like structures are appearing. Fractions below the sediment can be interpreted as substrate containing repositories in which organisms live. Branching structures provide nutritive substances. Cell bodies of neurons are insinuated. Building upon these experiences, elements which are needed for a distributed neural network are allocated. For instance, white boxes as an archetypical form for processing, storing, or accumulating. The elements are distributed by certain parameters, by height, by slope, by direction, or by certain characteristic like atmosphere or remoteness. A scripted path connections from a form a communicative neural system integrating machine and environment. Water flow fields form growing veins, which serve as supply network for farming plots. This is the first testing of growing algorithms determining surface granularity. We will come back to this later. Faces are doubled and dribbled along the surface normals, which are also partly displaced. A machinic intelligent landscape emerges with that gate implemented that represents its unconscious. The system doesn't know about it and is forced to generate elements beyond its own agenda. It's an object that provides shadow and shelter from the system's intelligence. One aspect of digitization is the full text digitization of books. And since all these texts are available digitally, not only humans, also machine can read and understand them. Moreover, these data are accessible independently of time and place, which calls into question the need for space in libraries. But at the same time, there has been a great investment in university library space, with major projects in England and elsewhere in the world. The demand for physical library space seems unbroken, but digitization changes the workflow, and if the tools change, the workbench has to change as well. By now, architectural typologies are similar. The Baroque library or the server room, their design principles didn't change in the same range as the digital shift would demand. Knowledge includes communication, storing, transferring, among other issues. The Voyager project is an example for transferring. It's a story about an exploring spacecraft traveling through space but also carrying data intended to transmit to extraterrestrial life. Although we do not know in which language and by which means we can communicate with them, we try. The Seed Vault in Spitsbergen, it's a story about storing gene information of plants for future generations. Data storage and landscape are actually closely related. Just think of information we get from glacier ice or from soil samples. And the Mundaneum, established by the Belgian librarian Paul Autley in 1889, is an early and fascinating attempt of a universal knowledge transfer system which shows some similarities with today's tools of the web. Well, back to data storage. We're talking about huge amounts of data. Conventional storing consumes huge amounts of energy and space, and digital information can be encoded either as a sequence of zeros and ones or as a sequence of letters. In laboratories, digital data can now be stored directly in the molecules of the DNA after it has been encoded using the 4 letters of the DNA acids. This also works in the molecules of living organs. An existing DNA strand is taken from an organism, copied several times, recoded and inserted into a DNA strand again. This happens in a DNA sequencer, mainly automatically. The sequencer virtually is a black box. It's a pure machine. Well, it's time for the application of the tested algorithms on the site. The central Tyrol region is strongly characterized by dynamic altitude development, woodland area, and the results of erosion. Today, the Alpine region is often portrayed as a largely unspoiled, natural, recreational area. In fact, the Alps are neither a natural or a near-natural landscape, but have been profoundly ecologically changed and reshaped by man in the course of history. Since then, natural and cultural landscapes have interlocked on a small scale. The city of Innsbruck is situated in a wide alpine valley crossed by the ravine, and it's surrounded by high mountain peaks and mountain ranges. And of course, it's a student city. As starting points, I used library and educational sites as nuclei for a growing algorithm. Many universities are traditionally situated in a garden. We're talking about campus. So I see university as a knowledge substrate within this concept of conceiving knowledge as a landscape out of doors. A shortest path algorithm starting from these points define districts, and new topologies generated by manipulating the elevation of areas generated by shortest path end branches. In the next step, these districts are transformed by displacement passes, and further erosion simulations generate more details and higher resolution, which is resulting in a catalog for evaluation. This is a closer look on the displacement phase and the erosion phase on the right side. Well, digital turn is characterized by significant factors such as big data, which not only stands for an awful lot of data, it also stands for very clever methods of combining and evaluating information. And it's more about calculated correlations and probabilities. And storing remains a subject of development. In 2018, world's total data adds up to 33 zettabyte and will rise to 175 zettabyte in 2025. The resolution, the granularity of data will continue to increase. Christoph Kucklick generally sees our society as a granular society. Just think about what we know about people from the 18th century, maybe the date of birth, the date of death, and what amount of data exists about a contemporary person. Through growing capacities of computed calculations, storing of data may become obsolete. Information could be calculated in real time based on formulas. But how does knowledge differ from data? The infinite monkey theorem states that a monkey hitting at random on a typewriter keyboard for an infinite amount of time will almost surely type any given text. And similar to that, in his short story, The Library of Babel, Jorge Luis Borges describes an infinite library containing every thinkable text, resulting from combining every possible ordering of 22 letters. Most of the texts are nonsense. Directory is available, but has to be found in the infinite amount of books at first. Today, probably artificial intelligence could help. Well, to reflect the topic of granularity in this project, in the next step of detailing, the source geometry is subdivided in several passes, which leads to a high level of fragmentation. With varying the scaling of the deviations per division and adjusting the amplitude of deviation, as well as the direction of fragmentation, the source, normal or divergent, doubling, triplication or quadruplication of faces is generated, depending on the source mesh. This is the subdivision of the source surface assisted by particles and wind force. The upmost particles are moved by wind force and form a basis of vertices for a new porous structure, which is treated with the granularity algorithm, which resides in the porous surface structure. This is the testing of implementing particles as elements, which increases the total surface area, the total faces, the total number of faces. Here we have a granularity test with a 7,000 and a 2,500 meters field, and here another granularity test with a 5,000 meters, respective 3,000 meters field after displacement to multiply details. And to comply with the initial algorithm, elements are distributed with neural networks connecting each element and with neural networks spreading from single elements heading to neighbors on the right side. A further multiplication of faces is achieved by merging two granular surfaces, and the archetypical white box devices, maybe operating as black boxes, as pure machines, execute steam sterilization like well-controlled saving and erasing commands. The larger elements are about sized 30 to 40 meters and the smaller ones are sized 8 to 12 meters. But it's a quite long way back from a machinic point of view to a human perspective. Addresses are each a reference to a space where humans can be found. As coordinates, they outlast any structural change, so to speak. The redesigned landscape stands for an aesthetic reflection of a virtual landscape of the mind, which should make knowledge spontaneously and openly accessible, perhaps with the help of augmented reality devices. The connection between man and machine is conceived here by referencing from the address coordinates of a city to the virtual level. Thus, on the basis of aesthetic manifestations, an understanding of future needs and possibilities in connection with acquisition and transfer of knowledge becomes visible and emphasizes the importance to make knowledge and its acquirement accessible to all people, both informally and spatially. Editing and control of knowledge needs many participants as well as culture and spaces of discourse. Some of these spaces might be virtual in nature. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you. Please, whoever have comments. Maybe close with an image to stream what in the preview.
Maybe choose a significant one. Right.
Maybe I just start commenting. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Go for it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think this project is also, I commend you. Oh, there is an echo for some reason. I think this project is also very successful, so I congratulate you on it. Just a second, I'm having some sort of echo, I'm not sure why.
Stefan, maybe you mute yourself while you're listening the comments. Maybe that's
yeah, that's a good idea.
Stefan,
yeah,
mute yourself. Yeah, thank you.
Stefan, I
Thanks.
mute you. I can unmute you later.
Okay, all right, so that's much better, thank you. So I think it's very interesting, very meditative project, almost goes into philosophy, poetry, and some very contemporary notions of cognition, because that kind of other cognition, machinic one, that we are starting to uncover only since very recently, even the theories, obviously, of knowledge and this type of, let's say, artificial intelligence, even though it's a very much a misnomer, existed for a while, but because of the kind of advancements in technology and series of other factors, we are only very recently, last few years, starting to uncover this new kind of cognition, which, interestingly enough, it is more like a landscape, nature of a landscape than let's say, for instance, something like a human mind or a human brain. So it's not like us, it's different. And I think that is an interesting thing. So I find your presentation very meditative in that context, almost philosophical context of new type of cognition, and then aesthetics, and how one can capture this kind of massive amounts of data, but also emergence of new cognition as well. And obviously that also links to materiality, material world, and also in philosophy, kind of materialistic approach to philosophy. So instead of idealistic. So again, the concept of material systems, generating and storing data, and the whole notion of also pattern recognition, things like that, I see in your project somehow. One thing that wasn't quite clear to me was this type of attempt of applying that to some sort of site and a function. I mean, nothing wrong with that. In fact, it would have been interesting if you did that, but it would be more interesting if you did it with some sort of, for instance, if you get a certain landscape of data or a kind of cognition that we can recognize that has a certain character, and then you act upon certain territory with it, it would make more sense to me. But it's almost a little bit of a fourth step. I wasn't sure about this kind of application on the actual site. For me, the kind of exploring of different resolutions and different morphologies of this kind of potentially even cognitive landscape are much more interesting. And even thinking about the brain and what science is telling us about brain, and even, for instance, brain and beauty and aesthetics. There are lots of theories that are out there now that you can bring into this project. I think this project is really a good first step, or a very good sketch for a future PhD. You must do further studies in this territory. I think it's very encouraging. So this is more my kind of more abstract comments, maybe for now.
Stefan, you can answer. We cannot hear you.
Maybe you need to unmute him, Claudia.
Yeah, I did.
No. Okay, thank you very much. I think the point with the application on the site, it's in a certain sense it's an experiment to put these algorithms onto a landscape scale. At least for me, for myself, it's the first time to think and to work in a landscape scale, which I like very much. I learned to like it very much, and it's an experiment somehow. and the results are in a certain way a virtual frame for a design approach, or for a thinking of new steps. How could it go on? And it's about to learn to read the landscape and to read the virtual landscapes. Information is here as a layer integrated in the environment, which we already have. Think of ads in the city, or better, the color of the trees. There is already so much information. How would it be if we augment all this information? Not in the way that we see it all the time, but in a virtual way. And maybe it has an impact of how we work with things. For example, reading a book is a linear process, but there are techniques like photo reading, which is somehow a panoptic, unfocused way of looking. And maybe there is something like a technique that we could establish, maybe without of devices, to look at landscape. I hope this answered to your question.
Yeah, and again, you're going to almost, can you mute your microphone again? Mute yourself, Stefan, thank you. You're going to neuroscience and brain, and even scientists are looking, for instance, how our brain perceives certain elements in nature. If you're walking through a forest and you see this kind of high resolution details of the trees and leaves, etc., dynamically moving in the wind, etc. This is something that has this is already proven by science, a very powerful impact on our brain. It's something that is inherently compatible. So when we start for the first time in history unveiling, rendering this kind of invisible, visible, suddenly this kind of extremely high resolution images and fields and landscapes, virtual landscapes, as you're saying, I think it is very interesting to think about how that then merges with our own cognition, and even just looking at that is a territory in itself. And then another step is this kind of experiment, as you're saying, of application. But I would say it would need to be directly plugged into the actual data and sort of make love to that landscape in a sense of explicitly being connected to it, rather than just being an image of something or a metaphor. So I think it's a very promising concept, and I think you are just at the very beginning. So I encourage you to keep working on these things.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Stefan. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very, very inspiring. I never saw any work of this sort, so I find it quite fascinating. Just a few thoughts that came to my mind when you were presenting about, so what I really like is you really developed a computational techniques that seem to allow you to go much further, even further. I understand this is a first step. So first of all, perhaps considering elements that are not visible. For example, when we see your images, first we see more like what is a positive with all this, the aggregation of those small elements, and then emerges the voids, which I find already very beautiful. But then that would be amazing to have other levels where elements that are invisible would as well start to appear or be illustrated or drawn or interpreted into your drawings. As well, the idea of a network of knowledge, perhaps literature, reminds me of a forest in the sense that, for example, trees that are really far from each other, we know that they communicate through the roots, even they're 100 kilometers away, and they have an influence on how they will look. It really, I don't know exactly how, but feels like it could be relevant for what you're trying, the kind of path you're trying to take into the research of communicating these different sorts of knowledge together. And then I love the idea of the storage that you have as well. So you're talking about distributed computing and storing devices. In the storing devices, again, that would be interesting to develop them and to have not only what is physical. I know you're having particles, but it would be interesting to develop it into different kind of materialities, whether they're like raindrops, whether they're particles that are in the air. I imagine there would be many different sorts that just the one you mapped so far. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yes, thank you. There are really a bunch of questions, further questions to would be intriguing to answer. And I think working on this project showed me the whole dimension in which we could think on all these topics. And I think somehow at a certain point, this work, you mentioned the forest, the roots of the trees and the communication of these trees. And at some point, the work on such a project would be very fascinating in an interdisciplinary way to bring in more precise technical information and everything. But of course, as a designer, we are always interested in all these inputs.
Yeah, and as you seem very proficient, you seem very good at computing. Like it's really fluid what you're showing, shows signs that you really know how to do it. So in that regard, and you started your presentation by talking about the unconscious of the machine. So really to have those layers of like what is physical and then going into more what is unconscious and like to add levels of immateriality to your drawings would be quite fascinating, and perhaps even jump scales, perhaps to focus on really like close-ups on some of the area and then have like huge maps of what elements that are far from each other could be connected.
Okay.
I mean, none of questions are just considered, they're just thoughts.
I might jump in now just to say that from what I really enjoyed from the presentation is somehow the correspondence between your theoretical background and the aesthetics of the images. No, there is a very interesting development of this sort of the skin of the landscape that develops through the algorithm as a sort of a process of multiplication, no? of the external surface area, as a sort of a hypertrophism of the surface area. And it reminds me a little bit of the intestinal villi that we have in our belly, no? Which we now know are our second brain. So somehow there is this sort of correspondence between the notion of knowledge implemented and embodied in the landscape, the notion of the aesthetics, which is also a sort and a form of knowledge, and the implementation of a language which is trying to mediate between one and another. And I think this is very consistent and it's very powerful in your design. And what for me is more problematic, or at least it creates a sense of uneasiness, is when you talk about unconscious of the machine. Because I'm totally fascinated about the concept of the intelligence of the machine and how this works in a completely different manner compared to how we compute, how we think, how we know, and how we store knowledge. It's a completely different field. Not field, but at least the process is completely different. But even when we talk about consciousness, human consciousness, we don't know what it is. No, there are two main explanations, one, or at least the theories. No, one is the one related to neuroscience, where consciousness is hypothetically a bioproduct of our neural network activity. But then there is the other school, which is the Palo Alto school, where consciousness is actually related to the bioproduct of language. So let alone what is unconscious, no? What is human unconscious. So I find a bit difficult to buy into the unconscious of the machine in this moment. I would rather go to machine creativity. No, is it possible that machine has? No, there are some interesting authors like Margaret Bowden that are talking about the possibility of machines that are actually creative. No, that the creativity that comes from artificial intelligence. And I think this is kind of a more solid ground to stand if you want to proceed in this direction. But I totally agree with what Alisa said, that it has all the right ingredients to be taken to a further level in terms of research, because it's so rich and so somehow groundbreaking in the sense that you have been touching so many levels that are extremely contemporary and innovative, that you're just touching the surface now. And it would be incredibly interesting to know if you go much deeper into the subject, what is coming out. But it's very, very interesting on a speculative level.
Okay, thank you. And I'm really happy about your question about that you find it problematic to talk about the unconscious of the machine. Of course, that is not very scientifically properly, because as a designer, you just scratch on the surface. But me personally, I like the concept of the unconscious as an idea very much, at least for that project, in that sense that I don't think that the artificial intelligence is the problem. The problem is as far as I have been reading literature about that, one of the biggest problems are the communication between man and artificial intelligence. The way how because we humans have just restricted means to tell the intelligence how to act. Artificial intelligence itself isn't the problem. So I found it necessary to implement a shadow, at least as a dramaturgic, as a MacGuffin, as a object that pushes the project further. But of course, that's subject to discuss.
It's a sort of an inspirational part of your research, because for me, what is interesting is that you have been quite consistent in finding scientific basis of your project, no? But then all of a sudden you introduce this topic which is much more blurred, no? And it's much more intangible, and it's much more subjective to discuss. So I can buy it into the fact that this dimension is a more spiritual one, if you want, because it pushes you to research. It's more inspirational, but it's less scientific respect to what you have presented. That's my point.
Yes, thanks.
Maybe I just add a few comments to what you already got, which really covers a lot already. And I have to say that I was also fascinated by your presentation. I enjoyed it tremendously. I think also the tone of your narrative, the language you have been choosing made it even more enjoyable than usual, I have to say. And so I think that was really good. I also again have to say that I enjoyed a lot of the book you sent over. Probably as an object in itself is the best I have received. You know, everything, the quality of the paper, the graphic, the layout, the way you have chosen as a white background as a kind of dominant color in a way. So all the images and the drawings, I think, kind of come out of the page in a way that is really beautiful in that sense, almost kind of embodying the whole concept of the book. You know, you begin to feel a certain materiality within these pages that somehow I think makes use of the printed paper as an instrument beyond, let's say, just you know, transferring an image onto another substratum. So I think, you know, that's also, I think this could be published straight away in my mind, and maybe we should discuss that with Claudia. But on the other hand, I think there is something which you know, as when I looked at your project, somehow I always imagined it at the microscopic scale. Now, I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but every time I looked at these images and I went through the book, etc., I was always thinking of this as a microscopic landscape, you know, something we could see at the microscope. And so when, you know, this idea of the garden that you are designing for me has really dives into another scalar dimension, and almost at the point in which we can spatially quantify the information. No, I mean, if you think about viruses, which are probably the smallest organism, I think you can encode information in, and there is a clear spatial relationship, which maybe you could bring forward more in this project in terms of actually describing this relationship between the informational and the physical, when you actually dive down at the level in which you know, DNA becomes the connection between these two realms. And so if we imagine what we see now as a kind of microscopic landscape of a kind of newly engineered series of organisms that are perhaps perfectioned to serve this role, this purpose of storing and transmitting and retrieving information, then, you know, as you know, as already the other pointed out, we can begin to imagine a myriad of application of this. And I think that's what is fascinating about it. I mean, on one side, this could be the image of the future Google campus, in which maybe not a building, but a set of microscopic ecosystems and gardens, so much more like a viral lab than a server farm. And on the other hand, this, I could imagine it very much translated into a virtual reality movie, for instance, for everyone to immerse into. And if we think that today virtual reality is effectively through gaming, for instance, rewiring the brain of millions of children or teenagers around the world, I wonder, you know, what effect or impact could it have for them and for us to spend a certain amount of time every day wandering around your garden, your virtual garden, with our VR headset. And that's something we could do right away, in a way. It's a kind of very, very straightforward application almost, but at the same time, still potentially quite powerful in actually physically transforming the way we understand and exchange knowledge. You know, And again, if we see the platform we are all pretty much stuck to at the moment, Zoom, you could imagine that this VR garden could become also very much the space in which we teach and learn through in this quite a particular time. How different would it be to have a tutorial within your virtual garden rather than through this Zoom conversation? So again, I think for me, what is great is that you could eventually really look at something that will perhaps happen in 50 years' time, as well as something that could be actually implemented tomorrow. But both these visions actually are equally powerful to me and exciting. So I think that's what makes it really compelling. And I would say congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for the comment. Congratulations, Stefan. I do agree that there is an element of this landscape of cognition that maybe it would be interesting to develop further and beyond the application to the site. And there are very valuable points that emerged today that could be an hint of how this could take further trajectories. But congratulations for now, and thanks to the jurors for the comment. Thank you. So, thanks. I think we say bye to Alisa, or she left already. Okay. She had to leave after the 2 projects. We will have Ilaria for another project, and then Tom Kovac will join also for the last 2. Okay, Charles, please.
Hello. Hello, my name is Charles, and I will present to you here today my master thesis called Synthetic Hydra. My thesis focuses on a new approach to tackle the growing problem of plastic waste in ocean through synthetic landscape methods, creating a biomechanical structure that collects and biodegrades plastic waste with the help of fungal mycelium. The presentation will begin with a video explaining the first part of the project, and later on I will go further into detail on some chapters. Hyphae are the thread-like vegetative part of the fungi, collectively called mycelium, forming decentralized underground networks that absorb nutrients from its environment. One of the primary roles of fungi in an ecosystem is to decompose carbon-based organic compounds, such as petroleum. From 2011 onwards, scientists found several fungus that have the ability to digest plastic waste in our environments. One of these fungus is called Pleurotus aspiratus, also known under oyster mushroom. The world's global crisis with plastic waste is getting worse year after year. Around 300 million metric tons are produced annually, out of which 4 to 13 million enter the ocean each year, adding up to approximately 150 million metric tons already circulating in our marine environments. Because of ocean plastic waste, 1 million seabirds and 100,000 mammals die each year. By 2050, scientists believe there will be more plastic in the sea than fish. Due to the fact that plastic degrades very slowly, most of it will remain in our environment for centuries. Macro-sized plastics will first break into meso, then micro, and finally into nano-sized plastics. This has severe effects on marine life, as they mistake it for food or get entangled in larger pieces, which is the cause for many deaths of marine species. This map illustrates the amount of plastic already circulating in our oceans. One dot represents 20 kilograms of plastic. In terms of plastic waste generation per year, China is the front runner with 59.8 million tons per year, followed by USA, Germany, Brazil, and Japan with 8 million tons. This next graph shows the number of imported and exported plastic waste per country by the year of 2030. As you can clearly see, China ranked number 1 in importing plastic waste from other countries. This was until 2018 when they stopped importing plastic waste. Another country that catches the eye on this statistic is Japan, who are clearly leading the chart in terms of exporting plastic waste to other countries. Osaka is the capital of Osaka Prefecture in the Kansai region and ranks as the 3rd biggest city in Japan. A recent study found that there are currently 3 million plastic bags along with 6 million other pieces of plastic floating in Osaka Bay. The following maps show the circulation of plastic in Osaka using the shortest walk path. Starting with the shops, plastic travels to the households, then to the recycling plants, and lastly to the docking areas and landfills. These pathways were then simulated in a time span of 2 days to reveal the areas of high-density plastic circulation. When looking at the end of the plastic's lifespan in Osaka, the areas of high density are situated on some of the artificial islands, which brings me to Yumeshima Island. Yumeshima is located in front of Osaka mainland and opened for public in 2002, but is still under construction. The island is therefore in a constant state of topological transformation. The material experiments consisted of using plastic waste as part of the fungi substratum. Oyster mushroom injected straw substratum was mixed with shredded plastic waste, cardboard and water. The mixture was then placed in a transparent box. The time span of the mycelium growing to the mixture took 7 days. When the mycelium has grown to the whole substratum, the fruiting body of the mushroom starts to reveal itself. This illustration shows the different recycling categories of plastic. From 7 categories, only 3 can be easily recycled. For my first test run, I used 5 different materials: cardboard, paper, PLA, PET, and PP. While PLA is mostly used for 3D printing, PET and PP are 2 plastics that count as the most used around the world for packaging. For example, almost every plastic bottle is made out of PET, and a lot of food packaging items are made out of PP. The plastics and cardboards used were shredded into microparticles, then sterilized using UV light. In the next step, the components were mixed together with the fungi substrate and put into 3 different acrylic boxes. Over a time of 7 to 9 days, the mycelium had spread all over the mixture, binding everything together into one interconnected substance. Another week later, the first fungi grew out of the mycelium mixture, taking 3 to 4 days to be fully grown. After a month without water, the mixtures rise up, resulting in a solid mycelium block. The second test run was made to further analyze the growing process of the mycelium, as well as to test the reaction of the substrate on plastics that are very hard to recycle, as for example LDPE. Again, the plastics were shredded and put together into an acrylic box. For my design approach, I focused on agent growth systems and emergent behaviors. As an input for my agents to grow on, I took the original mesh and created a topology, and satellite data was as well used, as well as a displacement map. Different forces like attraction and repulsion, as well as different behaviors that can be found in nature, like weaving wandering and stigmergy, were used to control the agents. The generated fibers were meshed and later on modeled with ZBrush. For my first catalog, the agents grew over a displacement map and were controlled by a vector and different behaviors that have a long-term logic. Following 2 drawings were generated from this catalog. For the next catalog, attraction and repulsion were used to further control the behavior of the agents. From this catalog, an instance was chosen to serve as an input for my system tests. This diagram shows the idea behind my plant structure. The structure gets its plastic input from underwater drones as well as from the land. The waste gets then filtered and put into 2 categories: recyclable plastics and non-recyclable plastics. These get then cleaned, shredded, and either reused as 3D printing materials or as a substrate for the mycelium. In the first phase, robots build the outer formwork, which will serve as shell for the mycelium mixture. At the same time, the robots incorporate the mycelium inside of these shells. In the next step, the mycelium starts its binding process, and after a week, the first fungi will break through the plastic shell. During this time, plastic gets biodegraded. After a few cycles, the structure dries up and biodegrades itself, leaving no ecological footprint. As mentioned before, the prototype was inspired by a previously drawn instance from my catalog. 2 small parts from this instance were printed in 3D in a 1:10 scale. They were then filled with mycelium and shredded plastic. The idea was to test the system and the mushroom's biodegrading effect on the structure. As a setup, PLA shell was used as well as water dripping systems, shredded plastic and mycelium substrate. These components were then blended together as shown in this catalog. They were then put together into the plastic shell. The system test ran for approximately 3 weeks. The following image shows some impression from the first system test. A second system test with a different geometry and density of the plastic shell was conducted. Coming up is the second part of my video showing some time lapses from the experiments and as well as presenting the next part of the project. For the system test, a part from my catalog was printed in 3D in a 1:5 scale. The idea is to let the mycelium plastic mixture grow inside the 3D printed shell. After 2 weeks, the fruiting body of the mushroom should start to make their way through the structure and slowly degrade the plastic mold. Coming up are 2 time lapses. The first one is the mycelium growing through the structure, and the second one is the fungi growing out of the mycelium and the structure. Input data from my drawings consists of the original mesh, a displacement map, highest and lowest points from these meshes, and the resulting proximity network. In the catalog, the shortest walk from plastic waste to the actual site resulted in several input points. One part of these input points are coming from landfills, the other part is coming from ocean plastic waste. From there, agents start their growing process, generating fibers that follow the logic of the proximity network. Zooming in for the final drawings, a more detailed and denser proximity network was generated with a new fiber system applied to it. The growth input comes from the plastic waste that is brought to the structure from land and sea. The fibers start growing from these input points and make their way through the proximity network. An ever-growing 3-dimensional structure emerges, made out of mycelium and plastic that remains there until the structure has itself biodegraded. As mentioned in the video, for the final drawings, more detailed data was used to generate the proximity network. The structure starts its growing process from their input points and slowly grows over this part of the island. This illustration shows the structure in 3D. And zooming in on a structure, you can see how it is embedded in the actual landscape. Following up are some boxes that show the functions of the system and where they are located. So firstly, there is the drone input from the water, as well as the landfill input from the local community. Then there are the fungi plants where the mycelium gets produced from spores. And then there are the plastic separation systems. The biodrone is an autonomous underwater drone with the purpose of collecting plastic waste and bringing it back to the structure. It is already doing a major part in the pre-processing of plastic waste, sorting them into different sizes and sterilizing it.
Looking at a section from the plastic separation system, you can see a sink flow tank containing 500 plastic bags and 500 plastic bottles incorporated in the structure. The sink flow system separates the plastic due to the density properties using different fluids that are introduced one after another into the tank. To conclude, my thesis presents a new approach for plastic waste, trying to shift the mindset of the local community from plastic being waste to being a valuable material that can be used to create a synthetic garden. The final structure functions as an autonomous synthetic system, collecting and biodegrading plastic as it grows over the island. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks. We can start with the comment.
I can start maybe. Well, first of all, the project is really, really interesting. As soon as I've seen it, it kind of reminds me of this book, maybe you have read it, The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Singh, which is an extremely interesting book that talks about working with contamination and how collaboration between different entities is necessary, to work when we work with contamination. So, but it's also a very political book. So if you didn't read it, I do recommend you because it's very appropriate for your project. Another aspect of the project that I enjoy is the fact that you are working with the plastics, and for me, plastics as you have described them, the problematic aspect of them, can be seen as a sort of an hyper object, in the sense that hyper object, according to Timothy Morton, are these sort of objects that are distributed widely in time and space, and they are so massively distributed in time and space that we are never really able to fully understand them. One example is climate change. So, for instance, on the cover of the book, there is an iceberg, and the meaning is that when we're talking about hyper objects, we just see the top of the iceberg and we never see the full amount. Why am I saying this? Because I find the project fascinating, and I find so much more interesting if we look at it from a perspective of raising awareness and the possibility that different ecologies can have in tackling problems like climate change, or in this case, plastic waste. So my question would be a bit provocative, in the sense that everything is in the project, everything is very consistent and very interesting. But then I see the project located in an island, in an artificial island in the port of Osaka. So my kind of question would be, can we think of this system as implemented in a more distributed manner within the city, instead of isolating it? Because in this way, its possibility, its opportunity as a system for not only for digesting plastic, but also to raise awareness, also as a sort of a knowledge sharing process, can be under the eyes of most people instead of being isolated. So my kind of provocation is, why do we have to isolate a process which could be very successful and it could be very meaningful to be instead up in the eyes of everybody? So it's in a sort of more of a gardening, and in a sense you have mapped a lot of routes that through the city are going to the island, and this route, instead of being just route for the voyage of the plastic, could actually be the route of implementing the project in much more a network like, instead of having it as an isolated object outside. But maybe this is just provocative, but it's just to push you to think also in another dimension. No? How can we hack the problem of plastic as an hyper object, which is not fully understood or fully comprehended by the people because it's so massively distributed. Maybe the question is not to isolate it, but to make it even more evident.
So to answer to your question, maybe I can explain you why I choose the island, why I choose this location. I was thinking about doing it in the city first, but then I chose the island because of the things that were planned for the island. So the history of the island is that that still it's under construction, and they have the plans to build a tourist hotspot on the island. First of all, they will probably do the 2025 expo on the island, and afterwards the city plans to build a kind of mini Las Vegas on the island with hotels and yeah, which generates a lot of waste. And because the island is inside of the bay, the waste will come more easily to the ocean. So the project is a reaction to the sorry, I can hear somebody else's sound. Very disturbing. Don't know who it is. Somebody has his sound on. Yeah, I choose the island as kind of reaction to the projects that are planned for the island, because I don't think that they are very good. For having such a project in the city, as I mentioned, I was thinking of it. It would work in the sense that it's closer to the community, and they can interact with it in front of their households. But I choose against it because of the size of my project, and because also of the amount of plastic that needs to get kind of fished or taken out of the ocean. So for me, it was clear that it's going to be a very big project. So in Osaka itself, it's very dense. It's very dense and packed city. So that was the reason in terms of space why I choose also one of the reasons why I choose the island. But I think I appreciate your comment. I think it's very interesting when you take this project and take it into a more urban area, and more closer to the actual community.
For me, I understand your reasoning, and it makes sense. For me, it's just instead of turning it into a waste treatment plant or a theme park, it would have been more powerful if it becomes an infrastructure of the city. So it's a sort of a permanent aspect that it becomes part of the life of the people.
Yeah,
but very interesting. It's indeed very interesting. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Hi, Charles. Yeah, I also find it a really fascinating project. I saw your book quickly as well this morning. I mean, mycelium anyway has a huge potential as well in a more industrial or more kind of on-site application. So I just wanted to ask you a few questions. First, on the prototype that you made out of a 3D printed plastic filled with a mycelium. And then more on the mobile drone that eats the plastic and digests it. So on the structure, I mean, first of all, there is really stunning pictures I found. It really looks like a living organism. It's like really hybrid in between the plastic and the mycelium that is growing on it. How do you imagine those structures? Are they temporary? Are they scaffoldings, for example? So have you thought about any infrastructure that needs to be temporary by a sense, like a scaffolding, or why did you design them in the first instance?
So for me, the structure itself is kind of a synthetic organism, and while it biodegrades the plastic, it grows, and so it's of course it's because of that it's temporary, but temporary at one specific place. But as it grows, it will stay on the specific site for a long amount of time. So, but because it's an organism and it's biodegradable, it will be temporary and not be on the island forever. But for me, that's very fascinating or cool aspect of the project, because it's raising awareness at a specific time, and it's doing its work and helping to biodegrade or get rid of the plastic, and then after some time it will just disappear and not be there anymore.
Mm-hmm. And it would be interesting to think as well about it. Once the plastic has disappeared, has been digested by the mycelium. Mycelium is really strong as well, right? So it could become actually perhaps treated, or I don't know what is the kind of coating around, or something from the inside, I don't know, but that could make the structure extremely resilient as well.
Yeah, well, during my experiments with mycelium, I found that mycelium material it's a very, very interesting material. Also, for the near future, for building houses, most really common houses, for example, it has very good properties. So it's for example, it's water resistant. It's very rigid when it's dried, and it's very light. So. It has a lot of good properties to be used as a building material for normal houses, for normal architecture bureaus, and there are already, I think, a lot of architecture firms that are doing experiments, are doing some works on mycelium. For example, there's one from that builds these mycelium blocks and builds actual structures with it, which was one of the influences for my project as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is fascinating, and it's definitely a material that's going to be used in the future. So particularly your thesis, your diploma, that definitely, I feel like industry oriented, as opposed to maybe other projects that are a bit more theory oriented.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it would be interesting to see how do you translate, and which part of your work you would translate to make it to the first step of being implemented in a way. But I do find that what you're developing with a 3D printing formwork that then disintegrate into a structure that could be solid and not disintegrate, but enjoy and thrive on the mycelium that can become extremely solid to become this kind of housing system, or even other kind of infrastructures.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps I really like the methodology you've used as well, how you start to mix the different ingredients and how you observe them over time. So what would be extremely interesting is to observe them over more time, in a way, to see how they would keep on evolving, and before you can observe them over so many months or so many years, perhaps write down or map the presumptions, the hypothesis, what will happen, you think, but you're not sure. In a way. And then on the drone itself, this is a really fascinating topic, to have a moving kind of a structure that is going to collect the plastic and digest it. And what I would find really interesting to work on from this stage, and I'm sure people will do in the coming years, is to see how such eating organisms would metamorphoses, right? Especially you're working in Osaka. So I find it extremely relevant in Japan, you know, that there's such a culture about metamorphoses. Yeah. You know, even in cartoons like Spirited Away, I don't know, you know, those monsters that they keep on eating things and then transforming and then retransforming into different shapes. And I think that would be really interesting to see the different typologies, the different morphologies, the different behavior that such hybrid animal almost, right? It looks like an animal rather than a drone. could do, and which kind of, you know, for example, in certain areas it could accelerate, in certain it needs to be slow and kind of digest. You can really kind of go on and explore so many behaviors and so many metamorphoses and so many shapes that this hybrid animal, robot animal could take. Mm-hmm. And how it is piloted. Who piloted? Is it more like you know, a flock, so that there's no central intelligence and it's more kind of behaviors that have been mapped into a programming of such hybrid animal? Or is there some kind of control that are the center of the branching systems that are mapped on the island? This is they are not questions, they are just thoughts. Yeah, I think that is. I mean, I wanted to ask you about how do you think it can be replicable in other areas? I mean, Ilaria really rightly asked about why the island, and you put it up as the beginning of a system that is such a good tool, such a powerful tool to raise awareness as well as actually doing the job. So how replicable is the system in your mind so far?
I think it can be applied everywhere in the world for me, because the problem itself is a global problem, and as my project reacts to this global problem, it's my belief that if we could have systems like this in the future, it would be amazing to have them all over all the terrains and all over the world. So with my project, it's very specified to be on near water, because I was my research was concentrating on microplastics and marine plastic. But I think a structure like this could also work on land itself, away from water. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what exactly? Yeah, I mean, one of the jobs as well would probably be to explore even more in micro steps how it decomposes. I know you put it that slide that you already showed more or less how it decomposes, mm-hmm. but to go into the micro steps of each of this decomposition, and therefore how it would be digested by the mycelium, could be like a way to launch it slowly towards more industry related.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anyway.
Thank you very much for your comment. Thank you.
One question is: are the mushroom edible? These type of mushrooms, the one that they are edible.
The mushroom are eatable. Yeah.
Because the next thought would be that another aspect of Japanese people is they really love mushrooms.
Yeah.
They eat them a lot. So actually, if the system could become more like smaller and be more networked, extended in the city, it could get also another function, which would be not just a waste treatment, but also a garden for production of food, if you want. Just a thought passing by.
I think that's a very interesting thought. I was thinking of this as well, but I didn't integrate it in my project as of right now. But I think it would be amazing if people would actually have these structures in their neighborhood and feed them actually with their plastic waste and get mushrooms in return. That would be amazing.
Yeah, just to jump in, actually, I think that the project, again, at many levels is a very good project. I think it's a very competent project, I would say. It starts from a very clear premises, which are, obviously related to an issue that we all, see as relevant, as important. To be addressed, and I think it's already very, very good that you have made such a topic as a central to a thesis in landscape architecture. That's in a way maybe we take it for granted now because we are used to deal with this topic so much, but at the same time is still a quite radical choice, I would say, to develop a landscape project based on waste, on plastic waste as a key topic. So that's, I think, is commendable. I also enjoyed very much the material experiments, which I think it's good to see. I mean, for many reasons, I think maybe this year we had less material experiments than in the past, and I think it's good that you managed to push through them, nevertheless, even with limited access to the lab and everything. So I think that's nice, and I think the material experiments are successful on two levels. I think on one side they clearly demonstrate the possibility of using such a technique as let's say bioremediation or biodigestion technique, but at the same time, of course, they also exhibit a potential in terms of developing a new material aesthetic that exists at the intersection of realms that are commonly considered as completely separated. And of course, plastic is in many people's mind a kind of evil right now. And again, what Ilaria was mentioning, it's curious that we are pretty much, plastic is pretty much everywhere, including within our body right now, and it's unavoidable. So it's important to find registers to kind of redefine the role of plastic, if you want, within the material processes that we are all somehow part of and interacting with. If I have to kind of make a critique, the part that I found a little less convincing is the let's say site scenario. Not so much because of the choice of the site. I mean, I understand Ilaria's comment, but I think to a certain extent I also quite like the idea that you have taken this kind of a terrain vague of this island that exists there, had been kind of sort of reimagined many times, but never quite developed, and as such it could work as a sort of infrastructural node that sort of processes these plastics and perhaps feeds it back in a form of new material products and systems or food back to the city. So in that sense, it creates this connection that you have drawn and mapped quite well and quite clearly at the beginning of the project. Where I'm not very convinced is the actual perhaps this image or the final elements of the proposal, that in my mind it's kind of ends in a sort of fictional tone or not, which in a way doesn't quite let's say connect with the tone of the rest of the project, and also not so much with you as a person, as a character, I don't see you very much as a kind of narrator of fictional scenarios, but rather as a very competent designer that has the skill to bring together different fields of knowledge and actually perhaps make a regional contribution at that level. So in a way, I would have liked to see this final scenario, to kind of follow that more, let's call, pragmatic line, and therefore perhaps propose a more kind of accurate depiction of how this let's say mycelium system production or digestion and material system production could work or look like. So perhaps more infrastructural in that sense, rather than kind of very fiction. Although again, this is also a scenario that we can use to speculate. But again, I think that the way I see you, I think that I would have liked a more consistent line of speculation at the end. I think it would help you also clarify what is your personal take on the topic and on the problem and your agenda. Otherwise, there is a little bit the risk that after creating a narrative that is very much about solving a problem, you eventually propose a vision, fictional vision that feels like kind of uninterested in that problems. And maybe you could argue that this actually is done on purpose to redescribe the problem from a different perspective, but then in that sense, you know, you could have, you know, proposed the narrative from a different point of view since the beginning, right? So whereas you went through a pretty let's say problem-solving narrative throughout the project, which, you know, for me is also fine. So I think, you know, there is a little bit lack of coherence there in my mind, but you know, it's yeah, it's still I think a very good project. So yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have been in the meantime joined by Professor Tom Kovac from the MIT, one of the pioneers of digital design and promoting as well this form of virtual teaching that you are experiencing these days. Thanks a lot for the comments, and thanks, Charles, for the presentation. I do agree with some of the comment that in this case seems to converge on the fact that we congratulate that the project is really good. There is still some sort of discrepancy, maybe in methodology between, you know, the final proposal and the final architecture that emerged, which could address more aspect of networks, aspect of precision between the material system and the morphology or the morphogenesis of the architecture, and the material experimentation, which is really beautiful. But overall, we think it's a very good project. It would have been, maybe this is an aspect to reflect upon.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for the comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think in the meantime, Ali.
Hi, Tom. Nice to see you.
And
hi guys.
Maybe also Stephanie. So we are with Manos, Marco, and Tom for the last two projects.
I've been in reviews for 8 hours, so this is the third one. So it's been a fantastic and long day of projects. It keeps going. The good things keep coming. So it's exciting.
Thanks for joining, although it's so late. Yeah, Tom is also in Melbourne, being professor at the MIT. So yeah, it's a bit late. Please, last two students, be sharp. Okay.
We went very late. We finish at 10 o'clock at night every Tuesday, so it's a long one. I had dinner in between while I was doing the reviews, like taking a bite, having a bit of coffee, and anything that could happen just to keep it going.
It's the problem on the online. Tom Verbes just invited me to a couple of events, and I realized just after saying yes that they're at 11:30 my time, so I'm gonna be very sharp, I guess. Let's see.
Yeah, well, what time are you doing that? Today? Is that today?
No. It's gonna be next week. Okay, cool. David, let's go for it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is David, and I present to you my thesis titled Micromania, a master plan for mountain maintenance. There is hardly any other landscape in Europe that is as strongly associated with intense images as the Alps. Already the name the Alps give most people very concrete and very impressive pictures that refer to the special position of this landscape in Europe. The area I'm working on is located in the Tux Alps, in a mountain region 25 kilometers east of Innsbruck. The area extends between the Inn Valley and the Ziller Valley. Especially in recent times, the discussion revolves around the future development in alpine areas. The constantly growing of infrastructure and climate change are main obstacles to the future of the alpine region. In view of its topographical and meteorological characteristics, the alpine region is particularly exposed to the impacts. Intensive agriculture, deforestation, roads, anthropogenic climate change, and urban sprawl are amongst the most significant human activities in regard to their effect on stimulating erosion. In certain areas, soil erosion in various forms is faster than biological succession. Here the rain flows off superficially, takes the soil stones with it, and deposits them in the next stream, which transports them on during high water. In this way, these areas of the landscape become ecologically unstable and in extreme cases can make an entire alpine valley uninhabitable. Here we can see a catalog where I applied erosion on my topography, on the topography of my work field. And here the associated simulation. Taking the terrain of an erosion frame and embedding it into the landscape shows clearly the change of the morphology and the impact it would have on the topography. A bioengineered solution for soil erosion is the mycorrhizal symbiosis, an association between the fungus and the plant. In a mycorrhizal association, the fungus colonizes the host plant's root tissues. Fungi transfer inorganic nutrients brought to the plant and receive carbohydrates in exchange. So by driving this bidirectional nutrient transport, they directly and indirectly affect the diversity and productivity of land-plant communities by their central role at the soil-plant interface. To get a digital reference to the mycorrhiza, I used the principle of the symbiosis for my fibrous drawings, where I used the contour lines of the topography, here on the very left side, as hosts and applied the shortest walk component, so that the fibers connect points in the topography on the shortest path. The alpine cultural landscape holds a key position in society. It is the ecological and material basis of human life, which not only provides the economic areas, but also the entire infrastructure, settlements, paths, bridges, pass routes. So the task is to, on the one hand, sustain the existing alpine landscape to prevent the disappearance of the cultural land, and on the other hand, allow the creation of evolving and changing ecosystems. And that's where the mycorrhiza comes in. The idea is to use the symbiosis improvement on plant nutrition, soil biology, and soil chemistry to stabilize determined areas on the landscape without following the modern approach to nature, which believes that nature is technically totally controllable. Through simulations on the topography, we have a series of predictive models about how erosion due to ecological changes will affect the alpine landscape. These predictive models are used to develop maps for what areas to prevent and in fact should be colonized with the mycorrhiza. The rest of the landscape remains untouched, free to develop its morphology formed by nature and to evolve its ecosystem. This creates a continuing process that doesn't have a final stage, so the terrain stays in motion. The next step was to get analytical information about my terrain. For that, I worked out different maps and drawings. Here on the left side, an elevation map showing the height above sea level, and on the right side, a concavity map, where the negative numbers from blue to green are showing the ridges and the positive numbers from pink to blue trough. Following is the flow analysis. On the left side, a vegetation map. And to also have information based on landscape planning, I added drawings on the right side from the existing road infrastructure, dedicated building areas, mountain sports areas, existing protection structures, and development areas defined through the spatial planning. These informations are essential because if people want to live and work in the Alps for long term, this requires a stable environment. However, since every cultural landscape is ecologically unstable, because as a human creation, it is always an artificial structure within nature, permanent circulation is only possible through the reproduction of the cultural landscape. For this scenario, I used information from the analysis as well as spatial characteristics to define areas of the alpine cultural landscape, and by that set up the design requirements for the conservation map. This is the conservation map coming from the composition of my described areas. The distribution diagram shows where the mycorrhiza is seeded. After colonizing the mycorrhiza, erosion is applied again, here in the catalog, the simulation. So by looking at an abstract of the catalog at a certain frame, for example, we can see the areas of the conservation map are conserved and the rest of the topography's morphology changed massively. So to see the evolution of the landscape, I did analysis maps and drawings of several stages of the erosion again. Here I started with the contour lines and developed height maps. Following the flow analysis, the concavity analysis, where it shows that the selected areas keep their concave and convex values, and the slope map, which shows the degrees of the slopes. This slide shows a satellite image with the embedded erosion frame. So for getting a closer look on the alpine terrain surrounding the district's capital, Schwarz, which is located in my work field, I did a zoom in on that area, where you can see in the catalog here, and also in the following simulation, the mycorrhiza colonized parts staying in place, as well as new terrains evolving. So to end the presentation, I will show you an additional video which shows closer the maintenance process.
A bioengineered solution for soil erosion is the mycorrhiza symbiosis, where fungi colonize host plants' root tissues. The idea is to use the symbiosis improvement on plant nutrition, soil biology, and chemistry to stabilize determined areas on the landscape. Drones form the machinic scenery. They are used for landscape scanning and monitoring, and for seeding the mycorrhiza. The first step of the process is to scan the terrain following the conservation map for simulating the landscape. These predictive models are used to develop maps for what areas to prevent and should be colonized with the mycorrhiza. The mycorrhiza granule is a versatile mixture of mycorrhiza fungi and soil microorganisms, which ensures improved water and nutrient supply and stimulates the growth and vitality. The granule is mixed at the composition plant, which is the ground station for drones to charge, fill up, and transfer data. Depending on what area to cover, the drones seed information or fly independently. Time passes, the erosion shows its effects, and the topography's morphology evolves. New terrains evolve, as well as the conserved areas remain in place. Through constant monitoring of the landscape, the conservation maps are updated, demanding how massive the impact strikes and how the colonized areas develop. If necessary, seeding follows up, forming a steady circulation of drones monitoring the mountains. No extreme interventions in a short time, but gradual changes with respecting the natural reactions. Micromania creates a continuing process that doesn't have a final stage. Modern society overlooks the fact that every human use represents an intervention on the affected alpine ecosystem. Just adding massive structures and brutality to endangered areas does not help. We need to sustain the existing alpine landscape, but also allow the creation of evolving and changing ecosystems.
Thanks, David. We can.
Thank you.
I can start if you want. I'm really happy about this presentation. I think it's your best presentation yet. I mean, it's definitely improved from last time I see it. And I think it's a really relevant topic that you're touching, because you know, obviously everyone is becoming more and more aware of the effects of climate change, and the fact that alpine landscapes are among the most subject to this change, and the effect that it's having on glaciers is probably the most obvious. But at the same time, we know that the repercussions are very much distributed across the alpine landscapes and affecting the communities living on and around it, as well as the multiple ecosystems that inhabit these landscapes. So in a way, the whole concept of conservation and landscape conservation, which is obviously crucial to these areas, and that has maintained them in a way from being developed after the Second War, in the period of great exploitation of these areas. I think it's now needs re-updating, right? And I think in that sense, the project is a really a beautiful description of how we may now use new technologies and the tools of satellite monitoring and drone, et cetera, to update this notion of conservation, which actually needs to become much more dynamic. In a way, to conserve or preserve a landscape right now, it means to transform it quite rapidly in relationship to the changes that is undergoing, let's say, naturally. And how to do that obviously requires new protocols. And I think that the example you have developed, the proposal, let's say the workflow that you have assembled and sketched here, I think seems to me a very interesting possibility. It's obviously one of the many, but I think certain aspects of this project are far-reaching, I believe. And then, of course, the implementation through the mycelium and the mycorrhizae, etc., is one. But in that sense, I think it's a very promising one, and it could be taken forward. So I think all in all, it's the project has developed into a very interesting scenario, and in that sense, I congratulate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, can I speak? Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm very, looking at the work with fresh eyes. It's very interesting to look at the resolution of your satellite imagery and how this starts to represent a degree of understanding of, I suppose, the new potentials of creating a kind of a new natural master plan, if you like. So it's kind of produced a new morphogenesis of information at a very particular micro scale, and how this contamination of human intervention becomes a new force of articulating a spatial understanding of how we understand landscape, how we understand land, how we start to populate the possibility of a large amount of reactions within landforms. So while you were presenting, I was also thinking about how we negate cities. When we speak about dynamics and dynamic urbanism, we sort of think about a topological notion of the built environment as a synthetic form without actually understanding the dynamic potentials of understanding the biological nature of the land itself that the cities themselves sit on. If you think about the energy and the resources that are potentially enabling us to maybe to rethink and rearticulate a transformation of the world and synthetic construction, it's very refreshing to see that there's a kind of a natural process that we can rearticulate back into through understanding the idea of what nature is, what the actual nutrients and microclimates and micro diversity on a micro level, and how we can start to understand plants, insects, and the nature itself as being part of a larger transformation within landforms. So I think it's kind of a new sensitivity that is maybe was not enabling us to understand the global if you want to call it dermis of the land for the last 20, 30 years. But now with the new technologies, we sort of have this top down. I'm very interested the way you observe the land from above and the way you understand the topology. So at one hand, you're understanding that the transformation into this ideal synthetic world from afar, from from a kind of a satellite condition. But at the same time, the value of what you're doing starts to challenge the way we pixelate the world from a very, very, very micro condition of creating what the potentials could be. So from my point of view, it's really refreshing to see this type of presentation, this type of project, because it's very articulate. But at the same time, I think that what I notice is that these kind of works that you're doing almost start to get us to try to understand a new syntax, a new understanding of a new vocabulary. I'm not sure if the current dialogue that we have in architectural discourse is generous enough to be able to verbalize, to understand what you're trying to achieve. So I mentioned somewhere else today that, you know, many years ago, Wired magazine understood that what was happening in Silicon Valley required a new vocabulary. So they produced a kind of an index, an addendum to the Wired magazine, which became a glossary of terms. And while you're presenting your project, I almost thought that this type of architectural proposition tries to requires a new index of terminologies to try to understand how we move from a kind of a distant understanding to a kind of a much more connected language that can try to describe these projects to be understood, to become part of a kind of an everyday language to be understood. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this in Wolf Creek Studio in Agavante many years ago, when, you know, the idea of geometry, generative geometries was still at its peak, and we were kind of obsessed with Maya and generative blobism. At the time, there was this connection between what was being presented, what was being said, and what was being understood. So I think it's very important maybe to think about the symbiotic relationship between what you're trying to propose and it requires a new language. And I don't mean this in a radical way. I mean this in a very positive way, to try to reach closer, to try to understand these microsystems, because I think that this vocabulary doesn't yet exist in a kind of a general architecture discourse. It's in many ways, it's a very research-based dialogue, but it needs to become part of a more emergent system of articulating our position as an architectural proposition that starts to produce these types of works, which I think in the world of, I mean, Marco mentioned climate change. You know, I'm hearing things like that we are probably living in a COVID period that will be felt for the rest of this century, whether that's true or not, but we don't understand this. But the effects in the world and the effects, the way we observe the world, the way you are presenting your work starts to become a kind of a potential for us to compute and also to understand the dynamic challenges that are happening over time. And what you actually speak about happened over millions of years of evolution. This is not something that is we are talking about some synthetic architecture condition like urbanism. This is far from that. It's a landscape that it starts to become part of a much more richer ecosystem. And I think that's what's generous about this, what's interesting about this. And maybe it's also a new typology. It's a new way of understanding the world in a much more micro system, which has its own ecosystem of comprehension. Claudia?
Yes, thanks, Marco and Tom, for the comment. No, I do agree on the aspect of that they were pointed out of this type of project opening up a new language. And in a way, this project discusses on a design, from the design point of view, a technique that is part of land reconsolidation since many years, but usually is kind of invisible. Why? At the moment, this technique is not used simply on a functional level to reorganize the mountain, but also to terraform and eventually create a new synthetic landscape. It will be interesting maybe on a next step to have this one to understand which kind of repercussion this can have at the micro scale, at the smaller scale of the interaction between the human and the landscape itself, I think, while at the moment remain a little bit at the territorial terraforming. But I do think you, as Marco pointed out, that you did a very good step forward from the green light to the final defense.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we don't have other comment. We can pass to Eric. Eric, are you ready? Maria?
Yes. So, hello, my name is Eric Pöltner, and today I want to present my master thesis called Living Silk, from the words live in silk. The thesis, Living Silk, deals with the dying of insects and offers an architectural concept for the future. According to studies, the insect population has already gone back by 75%. The reasons are diverse: climate change, pesticides, monoculture, or colonization, taking insects' habitats. For this reason, also architecture has its share in it. There are lots of problems coming with the insects dying. Many animals and plants are depending on them. Humanity too will suffer, perhaps even to a degree we cannot suspect at the moment. The proportion of our food habits in the global greenhouse effect is often underestimated, but it is enormous. Animal husbandry today accounts for almost 70% of world's agricultural land. Animal proteins are an important component of the human nutrition. Livestock production refers to all animals which are raised to provide meat, milk, eggs, feathers, or to be used for transport or assistance. All over the world, animals are raised in bigger and smaller scale. The biomass of all livestock is bigger than of all humans or wild animals together. The densest areas are Eastern Asia, Northern Africa, and the southeast of the USA. Geographic and cultural differences have a big impact on which animals are raised. The livestock production is growing dramatically. About 30% of all land is used for livestock or for the production of animal food. But this big amount of animals produce a big amount of pollution, like air and water pollution, loss of biodiversity, or resource exhausting, to name just a few. These pictures show the abstract beauty and destruction of industrial farms by Mishka Henner. So how can architecture counteract this problem? The solution I'm suggesting is to breed on 3 types of insects: beneficial insects, insects for food production, and insects as foods themselves. When fruits, vegetables, and grains are no longer sufficiently pollinated by wild bees or other insects, then you need help. The pollination beekeepers come and place their bees where they are needed. In Austria, this doesn't happen very often, and the earnings are low. Still, about 80% of the plants are depending on them. Elsewhere, massive help must be provided, for example in California. For the almond production, because of the monocultures, the bees are carried through the whole land only for a few months when the almond blooms. The same is happening in Florida for the orange production. About 30% of world's oranges are produced in Florida. But you can also breed on other beneficial insects like spiders, ladybugs, wasps, butterflies, bumblebees, or beetles. To feed on insects has a lot of benefits. Insects cost 25 times less CO2 than meat. They also need 10 times less space and much less food and water. To produce 1 kilogram of insects, about 2 kilograms of food is needed. For cattle, it is between 12 to 16 kilograms. In addition, 90% of an insect can be consumed. With meat, it is about 50%. Insects have always been eaten by humans. About 2,000 insect species can be used as food. 2 billion people worldwide eat insects. They are a perfect alternative for the high meat consumption and factory farming. So why did we actually stop eating them in the Western world? The project offers space for visitors and the possibility of tasting various insects in order to show the public an alternative to eating meat. So I chose Miami as my site to have the perfect climate for breeding on insects. About 500,000 people live in Miami, and about 6.1 million people live in the metropolitan of Miami. Miami is placed between the Everglades to the west and Brisbane Bay to the east. The surface under the city is limestone. A part of the city is beneath the sea level. The Everglades are a giant ecosystem. Fresh water comes from the surrounding lakes and rivers. In some cases, they flood the Everglades more, in other less. A lot of exotic and rare animals and plants are living there. The climate stays warm and mild all year. It has a tropic monsoon climate in summer with a drier season in winter. Water is the dominating force in the Everglades, shaping the land, vegetation, and animal life. One of Miami's biggest problems is the rising sea level because of the climate change. People are working hard for solutions like building higher streets, new canalization system, and wave blockers. But they're only buying time. The whole city could be underwater by the end of the century. So my exact site is in the south of Miami, at the Deering Bay, and actually in the mangroves. As there are no heights or landscape structures, a new terrain had to be generated. I did it with Houdini, and I wanted to have the island and river structures in my simulation, as well as the root structures at the edges. I used a lot of hydro erode to show the dominating force of the water. Because of the moisty, rainy, and tropical climate, a lot of insects like mosquito breed. The mosquitoes generate fast and produce a lot of offsprings. There are about 3,600 different species of mosquitoes. To replicate, the female mosquito needs to suck on blood for the production of eggs. The eggs are dropped on the water surface, and nearly every small amount of water is enough. Then the mosquito starts its life underwater, papues, and erases from the water. The mosquito stitch can transmit a lot of disease like malaria, dengue fever, West Nile virus, yellow fever, and Zika fever, to name just a few. Therefore, people fight the plague with insecticides. Big areas are sprayed from planes, but this is only a solution for a short time. Mosquitoes need 11 days to recreate, and other insects need longer. Because of the insect-friendly climate, people should start breeding on beneficial insects like they do for the orange fields. For example, spiders. Spiders were also used for the form-finding process. I used a wolf spider and a giant house spider, and spiders build different kinds of nets for different functions. For example, nest building, food, reproduction, or alarm, and every net differs with the species of the spider. I started with the wolf spider in a small container and 3D printed a cocoon to see how the spider integrates the cocoon in the net. For my second experiment, I used a giant house spider, and it immediately started building a net at the bottom. So I flipped the container, and after flipping it to the side, it connected both sides. After a few weeks, the spider started to build cocoons. When it starts to build cocoons, it starts with a silk carpet, puts the eggs on it, and then silks them together and layers it with other layers of silk to protect the breed. But there are other spiders which use the cocoon different. The diving bell spider. It only spends a small amount of its life above the water level, only to replenish the oxygen. So it uses as kind of survival capsule to live underwater. I wanted to do the same thing as the spiders, have a silk carpet and with an egg structure and silk the egg structure. So for my computer simulation, I used metabolls, and metabolls have the ability to melt together when they get closer and bigger. And in Houdini, this is controlled by the weight. So the more weight, the closer and bigger they get, and the more they melt. So I took points all over my terrain and placed different sizes of cocoons on it. And I want the cocoons be that big that you could live in and have my main functions of the project in it. For example, the butterfly house, research, restaurant, and breeding stations. So after having the cocoons, I produced insect cocoons inside for the breeding of the insects. After that, I silked it with different layers for the shadow, for the windows, and one layer so the insects can actually live in the facade. Then I combined all layers. So for my research cocoon, I wanted to have these small insect cocoons for the breeding inside. For the butterfly and restaurant cocoon, I wanted to have more space inside. And the beetle's cocoon is actually an open cocoon, so the beetles can still breed there, but they can leave the cocoon if they want to. The same is with the spiders. They can breed there, but the structure is very open and gives the spiders frames to build the nets in between. So it's more like a shell to filter the mosquitoes out of the air. Then I silked it all together, connected it with the height field. And then I took my terrain and took the highest holes and cracks and refilled it with silk, so the insects have more space to live in. Then I analyzed the different parts of my terrain. For example, this one for the butterflies. I still wanted to have a plateau where the plants can grow, but also a little bit of structure so the butterflies can hide and live there. The next step, the next one is for the spiders with a lot more structure to give the spiders a lot of frames and also space to live in there. For the beetles, I only wanted to have structure at the bottom. And the last layer is the path layer. It connects all of these parts together. So, and you can see the cocoons at the start where the restaurant is. So also humans can get to all of these parts. But also the insects can use this again to live in, but also as link to the city. Then I brought it all together. Here you can see the cocoons in the structure with the small insects cocoons inside. And if you want to harvest the insect, you either can go to the butterfly house you can see here, or you harvest them directly from the small cocoons, or attract them with food and trap them. The structure itself, I want it to be made of steel, so it keeps the cocoons in place, but is still strong enough to withstand the force of the water. Here you can see the spider part with the butterfly structure at the end, at the back. The butterfly structure, still with some trees between the mangroves. And the beetle structure. So when the sea level rises, I want the structure is strong enough to withstand the water and keep the cocoons in place like survival capsules. I want to end my presentation with a summarizing video.
Eric, you are not on the video. You are on the presentation.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see it now? I don't know what's wrong.
Try to share your screen again.
Yeah, if the video is not embedded in the presentation, then you need to stop sharing the presentation and share the video. Ideally, you should have embedded it in the other video.
Can you see it now?
Not yet. We have it.
Yeah, we can see it.
But no voice.
Oh, come on. Is it working now?
Living silk deals with the dying of insects. The insect population has gone back by 75% in the last 30 years. How can architecture counteract this problem? The project aims to find a structure for insects to live and breed in. 3 types of insects can be bred there. Insects for the production of food, insects as food themselves, and beneficial insects. The proportion of our food habits in the global greenhouse effect is enormous. To feed on insects brings a lot of benefits. Insects cost 25 times less CO2, 10 times less space, and less food and water is needed. 90% of insects can be consumed. With mammals, it's about 50%. The project is situated in Miami. There are no heights or landscape structures in Miami. The height field simulation aims to find the terrain which stands for Miami. The islands and river structures are in the terrain as well as the root structures of the mangroves on the edges. The water and the moist, rainy and tropical climate is perfect for mosquitoes. That's why they use a lot of insecticides to kill them. The project offers an alternative for that, to breed on spiders instead of spraying insecticides. The biological model shows how spiders build their nets between frames as well as the production of cocoons. Structure offers space for insects to live and breed in. The cocoons differ with the need of the insects. Less pattern for the butterfly and research cocoons, and more silk for the spiders and beetles. Spider cocoons are like shells, which filter the mosquitoes out of the air. Also the silk on the terrain differs with the different insects. A living silk arises.
Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. We can open up with a comment.
What?
We can open up with a comment. Maria, Marco, Tom.
Yeah, Eric, and you could just leave on the screen the image of the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Really beautiful presentation. I think the video, I like the smooth music. It kind of really gets you into the mood for new urban conditions. You know, I have a Range Rover downstairs in their car park, and I noticed over the last week there was a spider web growing on the passenger pillar side. So I was kind of thinking, you know, do I remove the web? Do I kill the spider? What does that mean? And since we live in a COVID world, obviously I don't have a passenger at the moment. So I was thinking, well, if I leave the spider web in the vehicle and I look at all these little flies that are starting to emerge in the spring season, which we're starting to have in Australia, little flies and mosquitoes, I thought, hang on a minute. This little guy here in the corner of my Range Rover is going to really assist me, because all the little flies that usually I would spray can just kind of be caught by the spiders. So it's part of an ecosystem. It's kind of a new pollination system where we all adapt new strategies for how the synthetic world starts to synthesize a new way of thinking about things. So because my computer. So while you were presenting there, I was thinking of course, you know, how urbanization has been associated with changes in pollinator community composition over a long period of time, which you also mentioned. And, you know, we look at showing urban areas, how these neutral, even positive effects of biodiversity are starting to look at new pollination, and how, you know, urban land transformation is also looking of how we produce a new biodiversity, how we can produce a new way of understanding co-evolution of these multiple systems. So what you're doing is, I mean, to the world, it's a very new way of thinking. You know, how we live with sustainability and efficiencies to start to design much more intelligent, efficient environments. Kind of like, I don't know, Claudia, you probably call this bottom-up systems, where we think about these new non-human ecologies, which have so much organizational capacities for us to readapt urban strategies and the way we cohabit with species that potentially we are kind of seen as possible renewable energies for food, for power, and so forth. So I really think this is, as I said to the previous project, we have these new sensor data and digital simulation available for us to understand species from a kind of that bottom-up condition, which I mentioned before. And these are very valuable methods for us to understand how we can add new sustainable models for urbanization for cities, and, you know, how we can keep my Range Rover as part of this ecosystem, which is kind of very, very, very interesting. So, you know, it also brings into mind to start to think about how this new adaptive design can become part of the urban fabric in a much more positive way. Can we actually design systems that promote this understanding of the new landscape where insect life, if you like, and species that insect-like can become part of a new impact on the way we understand a kind of a new biological contamination of the way we understand the synthetic formal spaces and spatial diversity, as you kind of introduce a new I don't know, you might call it remetabolizing of the world, and becoming much more diverse in the way we understand the pollination communities, how we understand the ecosystem was maybe invisible to us, but it's a kind of a more, for what you're doing, it's, for me, it shows a simulation for a more automated, systematic, synthetic biological contribution to architecture and design. The question, of course, for me is, how does this fit into to a kind of a professional system of architectural production? How we can augment these things to become, introducing these systems to become much more valuable models for this bottom-up ecology. So yeah, I really applaud this type of direction, because it's so left of field to what we normally see in architectural studios and architectural presentations. And I think it's a really dense way of understanding a new ecosystem of networks that we are yet to emerge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. No, I totally agree. The point is trying to understand how we design, and not only for human conditions, or not with a totally anthropocentric perspective, but how we design to be able to accommodate other species with which we coexist and collaborate. And this entails not only an evolution of the design tool, but also in a way an evolution of the aesthetic, which we inherited from modernity, which was a white, clean surface. And of course, like spider web and all the paradigm of cleaning, it's inherited from that type of mental framework. But this is something, it's cultural, we have created, and therefore we could create a different culture, whereas aesthetic, beauty, design, product are more hybrid and pure, and are able to interact in a deeper manner with this process and byproduct of the society we live in.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I just wanted to add, I think we do accept and understand that insect life and biodiversity exist in chemical substances that we use as in human environments, such as cleaning agents and such as medical applications and so forth. But yet we're yet to use the byproduct of the biological evolution of life to become part of a constructed environment and to become part of this ecosystem. So I think it's very encouraging to see the synthetic biology create new ways for us to understand the environment and to develop this research further, because I think it's very important in any climate. I guess I was going to say this climate, but the future of bioactive environments is going to be very relevant to the way we understand this research as being part of the build system that humans create. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can I jump in? Can you hear me?
Go for it.
Okay. Well done, Eric. Thanks for your presentation. I think you're in the right direction, but I have some kind of comments to make on actually both on your spatial and your narrative aspect. In order to find some kind of traction into the real and pragmatic world of nowadays, I think we should be more persuasive in terms of concept making and spatial making. I was following your presentation, and I was really struck by the fact that you were using a transposition from the beetles and the spiders world into the urban system. And I think we should make an extra effort to invent new words, to invent new categories, and to invent new concepts. We cannot make an association of let's say a beetle's pod, as you would name it, and then you have next to it a photo, a diagram of a restaurant. I mean, both of these are problematic because a beetle pods, it makes no sense into our human scale, okay? And the restaurant as a topology in a program doesn't make sense into what you want to propose. So in these two aspects, you need to make an extra effort or an extra step in order to invent a new program that will give it a name. And that program should be around the consumption of food, let's say, but it's part of your project that to name it, and to depict in a more pragmatic way how this kind of spatial articulation of new program and new activity can take place. If we don't arrive to that kind of resolution, all this will look a little bit more distant from the world and the society that we live in, and we will not be able to make a transformation of it. Okay, so I think you have all the ingredients in your presentation and in your project, but somehow you need to make this kind of effort to see the spaces, to invent the activities, and to suggest to the world with clear names and clear concepts what you are proposing. And I think that will make the most out of your presentation, because it's very nice to have this kind of intelligence from one species into another and from one scale into another. But if we don't transform the names and the concepts, we run the to be a little bit more in a gimmick and a comic side. But that's my kind of point. But nonetheless, well done for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manus. Marco, Maria, for comment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I would agree with the previous comments. I think that there is the topic. It's absolutely relevant, and I think the way you unfolded it, it's competent, and it is actually illuminating on new opportunities for infrastructuring landscapes of this kind. I think also on the other end, I think there are missed opportunities in a way that you could have, taken, maybe spotted and taken forward, but at the same time you could still do that. So in a way, they are not necessarily missed; they're just missed for now. In that sense, I think the experiments you have conducted with the spider deserve more attention in a way. I think they are fantastic. I think they are highly innovative for an architect to go to that level of experimentation with the living organisms and successfully manage to almost create a dialogue or conversation with that organism to the point in which the organism actually created the structures, but at the same time, the structure were in a way induced by you, or you were able to, let's say, hack into the way the spider was creating this structure. So for me, there is that those experiments demand more, perhaps a more analytical approach, but maybe also just simply a more careful recording and documentation. And I mean, the way they come across here are that there is so much to learn and to understand from that kind of conversation almost that you established with the spiders. And spiders are incredible organisms, not just because of the beautiful structures they create, but also because of the way these structures effectively are an embodiment, let's say, of their extended brain, right? So they understand the environment that surrounds them through their webs. They use their webs as of course, a kind of material system that enables them to access food and to harvest food sources, but really is a cognitive instrument from them. And the moment you are capable of hacking into the production of these structures, you are effectively creating a means of communication with them. And for me, in that moment, you are really opening up a new way of designing, right? I mean, you are really opening up a way in which the product of your design really emerges of a new sort of conversation, and therefore a new intelligence, we could say, could evolve from that. And I think that's, for me, is the deepest level of knowledge that you can extract from those, and that you can load back into your larger scale vision and proposal, which I don't mind in terms of the way you have drawn it and unfolded. Perhaps the sort of color scheme of your final drawings is not my favorite, but again, I think that's very personal as well. And I think for me, the structures you have created, it's actually possible and feasible and potentially quite interesting way to understand a kind of soft, elastic way of infrastructuring landscapes that are indeed in rapid transformation, like these ones. But for me, what would be even more interesting is how you could take from the material experiment you have done, the logic by which we can conceive this landscape being built at this larger scale. So what kind of material and construction processes we can imagine to implement to effectively establish such landscapes, and that obviously implies how they would appear, what would be the time frame for them to appear, how would they perhaps adapt to these cyclical changes that occur in this type of ecosystems, as well as the kind of longer term trends that you have analyzed, and that will for sure completely drastically change civil ecosystem. So this is where I think you could really push this to the next level. And but again, I think maybe this also referred to the whole morning. I think what I'm really excited about these 5 projects we've seen today is that all of them open up incredible scenarios for further research, for further development. So you guys have really made the best use of what a thesis project for me is, which is not the conclusion of your university career, so then now you can finally move on and do some stuff in the real world, but on the contrary is a powerful statement of intent of what your future career may be about, and what kind of impact you may be having as a professional in the future. And I think that's the most valuable element of all.
Yeah, just to add maybe that I also want to congratulate you, Eric. And I think the best parts of the work during the whole year that we had with you, as Marco mentioned first, is this biological experiments with the spiders. But also I want to point that you have a great skill in digital tools and that you develop a system that could actually replicate your experiments. And I think that was also very much valuable step. And then we went to these experiments where you started to create the material system based on the observation of your experiments and your digital experiments. And I think here we needed to maybe to stay longer. I was expecting that you'll have more development of the material system that we could see in the scale probably of the structure, and to probably, because I have still questions unresolved on this on that scale. I'm thinking, okay, what do we do? Do we actually use these spiders for creation of the structure? Do we replicate the behavior? What do we do? Like, there are lots of potential directions in that scale where we can go. But maybe you made a step up in the scale, and you scale up to see overall strategy, and you brought quite a strong narrative that definitely need to be discussed, and brought a lot of comments now, and it's absolutely relevant. I would probably suggest you to think for an answer of all the questions that you put in the beginning of the presentation, thinking, for example, what if we harvest insects? What if we start using insects for the different means, maybe even for the construction, then that would be great to see the reflection in the final images and the final discourse, seeing a human scale, or at least a presence of a human in your master planning, to see how does it actually affect the way we inhabit this master plan that you have, because it's you are still in representation, the macro scale, I think, staying in you are representing this material system that you develop, but you are not answering all the topics that you tackled in the very beginning. That probably very pity, because I would like to see those scenarios. But overall, I think it's a good presentation and a great project. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, all the juror. I think I had very much appreciated the day. It was a great conversation about the work at the Synthetic Landscape Lab. We have jurors that join from different parts of the world. So Australia, Spain, Russia, Greece, London, Austria, Germany, Italy. So I think we are missing US today because of the time schedule, but we'll catch up on that next time. But it was a great conversation. There's an opportunity that this critical period that open up to actually be able to create dialogue that are really worldwide and cross countries in a way that we were not able to do before. Congratulations to the 5 students that presented today. I think there were some exceptional students, some exceptional project, and some good project with some exceptional moment. It has been a very different year than usual, because our studio is usually based on computation, but also on the relationship between computation and biological experimentation. And this year we had to somehow try to understand how we represent this synthetic landscape to other technique, investigate more philosophical paradigm, machine learning, but as well as these allow us to somehow detail more some of the proposal, which I think is another element that we would like to push forward next year. And we have already some idea on how to do that. So we'll be in contact with the students that presented today and that are graduated for a final meeting, and discuss also how some of these ideas can be brought forward in the future in research or in work. And well, thanks everybody. I don't know if the clapping in Zoom work or if we...
Clapping is good.
Thanks, Maria, for working with us constantly.
Thank you, Claudia.
And Marco for being our external examiner this year. Tom, Marco, Manos, do you have any final suggestion or comment for us?
I think it's what I wanted to say is you're dealing, you're looking at 180 million years of evolution, and you're sort of thinking then, what will a few decades of industrial civilization compete with that? And so what you're looking at is an epoch of time that really has not been understood or researched so much in our current operation of architectural research. So to look at the non-anthropocentric kind of thinking that you're involved with, I think it's really looking at kind of a cross-disciplinary project that doesn't have the usual connectivities. You're dealing with science, you're dealing with biology, you're dealing with notions of you're creating a kind of a collective sensibility that is so nascent. It's so important to be developing this type of deployment. So I applaud the students, I applaud your studio, I applaud your work, because it's dealing with centuries of information that's geological, that's hidden. So I would call this kind of, from your perspective, and your students' perspective, a kind of epoch, make a time of architectural resolution of a level that we are experiencing in a new way. And I think the tools, the computational relevance that you speak about is now at a point where we can start to really look at way of understanding the world in a very new and fresh way. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Tom, for joining. And the student, if you want to read, Marco, any final remarks?
No, I mean, as I already said before, I think that for me, the aspects that strikes me the most is how, I mean, also comparing with previous years and thesis project I've seen, I can see there is a clear progress and evolution of the thesis project as a piece of research, and as really an important moment for the beginning of a more personal journey. And I think that's for me is a critical element, that students are beginning to actually feel the possibility to have a more personal trajectory in the discipline, and to essentially break the conventions and craft their own domain of knowledge. And I think that's the best thing that can be done, because it's necessary for our society, but I think it's also the smartest move for somebody who is beginning his own professional career right now. It will offer the best possible options for the future, because I have no doubt the future will be about the multiplication of our profession. It will be an explosion of ways of practicing and of hybridizing knowledge and crafting your own fields of expertise. And I think that's where you start from your thesis project mainly. And I think that you have done it very well. So from now on, I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Manos, do you have final comments also in relationship to work?
I have one final comment, and I think it's a proposition to the students and to all of us. I think it's time to save AI. I think it's time to save AI from the old epistemological paradigm, and alongside AI, we will save urban design. We will save design. We have a fantastic algorithms in our hands. And as creative personas, we should actually take them out of all the epistemological frameworks. And we should try to invent new epistemologies, new way of understanding the world. Okay, otherwise we will be trapped, as AI is now trapped into all this old-fashioned way of thinking. And urban design needs this kind of new fresh air, and I hope this kind of non-human sensibility will be expanded in all different intelligences around our planet. So keep pushing that in a more creative direction. That's all.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Fantastic conclusion. We'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. See you soon.
Bye, Marco.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, bye. Bye, Manas.